Someone make it make sense.
Probably a couple.
All right, my friends, we are here live in court today. Defense's case in chief had a little unexpected power outage today due to apparently a car hitting a telephone pole or something. There were like 2,000 people in Greensboro out of power, which is insane that one person could do that much damage. But you know what? It's all good because we are just now getting to the AARCA dudes, which is what I really wanted to see. I know this morning they ended up calling a forensic pathologist that no one was really expecting. It was not anyone that was named in the Commonwealth's motion. I know we were talking last night about Chris Van E potentially, but I don't know if they're calling him or not. But you know what? It's all good. We will recap the forensic pathologist's testimony when we get to the recap. But let's jump right on into the AARCA dudes because that's what I really wanted to hear the most. Hopefully you guys as well. So that's where we should be at about now. And we may just be able to catch up all through the lunch break, which would work out great anyway. I have no idea what witness number. Let's see here. I think he's a doctor, right?
Step right up and step on me.
You solemnly swear the evidence given to the court and jury in the case now and hearing the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Yes.
All right, Mr. Jackson, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Doctor, could you state your full name and spell your last name for us, please?
Daniel Michael Wolfe, last name spelled W-O-L-F-E.
Dr. Wolfe, what do you do for a living?
I am the Director of Accident Reconstruction at a company known as AARCA, A-R-C-C-A.
And what is AARCA exactly?
So AARCA is a forensic engineering consulting firm. We have a variety of disciplines that include human factors, biomechanics, crashworthiness, accident reconstruction, just to name a few.
Based on your title, it sounds like you're the director of the entire accident reconstruction format for AARCA,
Yeah,
correct?
wow.
That is correct.
What sort of contracts does AARCA routinely engage in?
So we do a lot of work in civil litigation. So we work with insurance carriers, law firms, but we also consult with
Can you
and
slow
do
down to
projects
normal
with
speed when
the
he
federal
gets to,
government as well as the
my
National
God,
Hockey
Mikey,
League on
where-
player safety.
where
So we're
are the
involved
Vikings here?
in a number of
Guys,
research
holy
projects as
shit.
well.
Oh my God.
Is there other clientele that seeks out AARCA for accident reconstruction or biomechanics or human factors issues?
In terms of beyond the parties that I just listed?
Commission, the U.S. Department of Defense?
Yes, the military, yes, the Army.
Tell me a little bit about the work that you've done for the Department of Defense.
Well, that was before my time, but I'm aware of projects that dealt with working on vehicles that were over in the Middle East, where they basically designed energy-absorbing seats because there was injuries when the vehicles were going over IEDs.
Is AARCA known both nationally and internationally? Is it recognized as a leader in accident reconstruction issues?
Yes.
As the director of accident reconstruction at AARCA, do you specialize in both accident reconstruction and the human factors that are associated with such reconstruction where necessary?
Yes.
Can you give me a synopsis of the professional discipline of what is accident reconstruction?
I think a simple definition in my mind would be the application of physics, engineering science, and mathematics to collision events. I always like to think of it as if you open up a puzzle box and you dump the pieces out and you've got a bunch of pieces and you're trying to piece together the evidence to see how everything fits to get a clear picture.
And what is the application of human factors to that process?
So to give you an example of human factors in the field of accident reconstruction, so I do a lot of nighttime visibility and conspicuity work. So to give you an example of that, let's say a driver's driving down the road at night, there's a pedestrian that's crossing the road. So we want to have an understanding based upon that pedestrian's clothing, the headlights of the vehicle, any potential artificial lighting in the area. When does a driver recognize that individual on the roadway? And then we can also look at literature to have an understanding of how do drivers respond based upon the hazard they're presented with. So there's different response times depending on the hazard. So it's going to be different for a pedestrian crossing the roadway or a driver responding to a vehicle suddenly stopping in front of them.
Dr. Wolfe, as an accident reconstructionist, do you investigate and reconstruct both passenger vehicle issues,
Okay, so
commercial
for anyone
vehicle issues,
who,
motor vehicle,
Supervisor,
pedestrian
for
issues,
anyone-
all of the above?
Yes, I see all
for
types.
anyone who's just catching up here, so this dude is from AARCA. He's one of the experts who's going to be testifying for the defense. However, they're not paying him. They did not hire him. And the reason is because him and his colleague, Dr. Rentschler, who I believe will be directly after him, were hired by the feds as part of the federal investigation into this case. And they testified before the federal grand jury. So they are completely neutral, objective, unbiased, third parties, experts that were brought in for that federal investigation and now hence are testifying. Surprise, surprise, right? What they found as neutral, unbiased, objective third parties happens to be testimony that, what a shocker, not benefits the defense, right? So this is we're finally getting to what we should have heard from the Commonwealth, which is actually how shit could have happened, like from a scientific level.
Types of
Right?
accidents.
And how long have you been doing this work with AARCA?
A little over 7 years now.
Good
What
morning,
education,
Candace.
training, background
Happy to see you, my
qualifies you
friend.
to perform the duties that you just described for the jury?
Back in 2012, I received
So the question was, what training qualifies you to perform the duties you just described? I'll go ahead and answer that for him. The answer is all of it, all of the training.
the Bachelor of Science in Engineering from James Madison University, along with a minor in mathematics. Some of my courses while at JMU included courses in physics, statics, dynamics, kinematics, material science, along with your other engineering sciences.
Oh boy.
Subsequent to my undergraduate degree, I then went on to the University of Delaware to pursue my PhD in electrical and computer engineering with a concentration in electromagnetics and photonics.
What additional training or experience do you have as it relates to accident reconstruction?
I think Senator should be joining us as well, hopefully.
Formal education in the
I know she's watching as
Certainly.
well.
So in addition to my undergraduate degree and my PhD, I've continued to take courses through Northwestern University in crash reconstruction. Some of those courses have included human factors, lighting. I've taken courses on electronic vehicle data, photogrammetry, three-dimensional laser scanning. So I've continued to take courses
I was
subsequent
just,
to
that's
graduating.
funny.
Do you also
Did you
hold
hear
any
your ears
accreditation
ringing? I was
in
just
terms of
talking
accident
about you and saying, Thunder, my choice.
Yes, I'm accredited by an organization known as AARCA, which is the Accreditation Commission for Traffic
Oh,
Accident Reconstruction.
ACTAR. We've
you
heard about
trained in
ACTAR from
photogrammetry?
somewhere else. Shout out to ACTAR.
Yes, sir.
Is that to determine vehicle crash incidents?
Actually, I just remembered where it was from. We heard about ACTAR. Hold on. In the Murdoch trial, from one of the experts. It was actually one of the defense experts who I really liked. It was the older dude. I forget his name. He was the older gentleman who was like really fucking professional and like Poot tried to get him to say certain shit and like he wouldn't do it because he was like, nah, I'm a professional. Like Poot was trying to get him to talk shit about SLED and like he wouldn't do it. But he was the one who mentioned ACTAR. Shout out to ACTAR. Just have to say it.
Circumstances surrounding them based on map scenes, evidence from photographs, things of that nature.
Absolutely. So photogrammetry is the science of extracting
That's
information, if you
hilarious,
will, out
Thunder.
of photographs. So things dimensionally
Crash
about an object
Daddy.
spatially without ever actually physically
Crash Daddy
seeing
number
the
one.
object or
Let's go ahead and
inspecting
add
it.
that to the banner.
So you don't have to be at the scene to effectively and scientifically reconstruct it to your satisfaction.
No, not at all. And quite frankly, to be honest with you, in my world in civil litigation, oftentimes by the time a case comes across my desk, it's, the accident happened 5 years ago. Some I've even had 10 or 15 years ago. So getting access to the vehicle at that point, it's going to be a long shot.
Doctor, are you a member of any professional societies?
Yes.
All of them.
Describe those.
So I'm a member of the Society of Automotive Engineers, SAE. I'm also a member of the National Association for Professional Accident Reconstructionists, the Optical Society of America, and also the Illuminating Engineering Society.
Illuminating
How many
Engineering
cases
Society. That
would you say
sounds
in your
fancy.
experience in your career have you reconstructed or attempted to reconstruct? You or your
Yes, I heard it. I didn't have power, as y'all know. I was listening to it on my phone, but I skipped it in terms of covering it because that was an unfortunate pause for him. Hold on.
team members.
There we go. It's not any better.
Ooh.
That's better. But I wanted to get to the accident reconstruction people because this is I think most of you guys were probably listening like I was to the forensic pathologist anyway. But we'll get him on the recap. I really wanted this is what I was excited about. So
I don't actively track that. If I had to estimate at this point in my career,
if we have extra time, for example, maybe during like the lunch break, we'll go back and we can listen to some of it. But yeah, I think probably most of you guys were watching that anyway.
probably well over 1,000.
And how many of those 1,000, I know you'd have a number specific, but how many of those 1,000 would you say involved pedestrians as well?
Several hundred. As I mentioned earlier, a great, excuse me, a great deal of my work is in the field of lighting and visibility. So there's a direct correlation between time of day and pedestrian incidents. We see a rise in the evening and night hours just due to drivers having difficult a difficult ability.
Shouldn't that be so exciting for Lally? Because remember how many times Lally asked people about the lighting at the house outside? Was the lamp on? Were the lights on? Dude, this is amazing.
To try to perceive and recognize individuals. So I certainly see a lot of pedestrian collisions in my casework.
You've done testing or research as it relates to the kinematics and the interaction between pedestrians and vehicles.
Kinematic.
Absolutely. So we do a number of tests at AARCA to look at the interaction between pedestrians and vehicles. One of the ones I know I did most recently where
I don't think he'll be able to do this, Jackson. I mean, but I wish he could be like, so the Commonwealth had an expert, quote unquote, I'm doing air quotes, who defined kinematics as, what was it exactly, Fender? I know you remember. What did he say? It's sort of forward. And to quote that, right, and be like, so what do you think about that definition? He can't do that, but I wish he could.
we were evaluating a vehicle essentially rolling over a pedestrian. So we wanted to understand the vehicle dynamics as well as the interaction between the pedestrian and the road surface. So we conducted testing at AARCA to evaluate that.
Does AARCA have any other disciplines other than just accident reconstruction?
Absolutely. So as I mentioned earlier, we have crashworthiness. So again, that's where you're going to be looking at the safety of a vehicle. How does it perform in a
We're
crash?
so happy you're here.
We have human factors,
Missed you so
failure
much, man.
analysis, premise liability, and biomechanics.
As an accident reconstructionist, doctor, do you or have you studied or tested?
Yeah, forward and
the
stuff.
forces
Thank you,
that are at
Bender.
play
That's what it was. Forward and
between
stuff. Great.
objects interacting?
He
A human
probably
being
said sort
interacting
of also.
with a vehicle, for instance.
Yeah,
Part
absolutely.
of what you do.
Yes, sir.
Describe that.
So we use hybrid instrumented dummies at AARCA for our testing. So if that's,
Fuck
we
yeah,
want to have an
you do.
understanding that an
That's
occupant
right.
in a vehicle, the forces that they might experience, or for any matter, for again, if
I
it's
mean,
an instance where you
Here
have
we
some,
have someone who's clearly knowledgeable. Like, remember, the jury's going to be comparing him, for example, on his testimony, right, in terms of credibility, because that's what they're asked to do, to Trooper Paul. Here's a dude, like, this is insane. Like, you can't, I mean, you really can't even compare them. But, like, this is what the Commonwealth, dudes like this is what the Commonwealth should have provided if they believed even a modicum of belief. If they had even a modicum of faith in their theory of the case, they would probably have, I would imagine, right? Because this is what every trial does. They, if you're trying to prove something that you know is true, you bring in people like this, because why? Their findings will concur with the theory. Obviously, why did they only go within quote unquote experts that are within law enforcement? Well, apart from the cell phones, right? Well, I think that's kind of obvious, right? Because any reputable person is not going to find what they want them to find.
something that ends up falling on someone's head, and you have an understanding of the forces involved in that. We perform testing with hybrid dummies.
Have you ever authored any peer-reviewed papers in the field of physics?
Yes, sir.
Describe those for me.
So I have a number of papers in the field of lighting and optics. I have a
Great. This
recent
is
publication
crazy.
that deals with Toyota and Lexus vehicle control history records as well.
Excellent.
Called Toyota vehicle control history, sudden braking.
You know what? Also, guys, I bet he knows about the Toyota tech stream. Remember that whole thing that Trooper Paul discovered right before the trial, basically, and was like, I don't know how this works, and like, I'm going to try to figure it out, and like, it was a big disaster. I bet this dude, and remember what I even said when we were talking about it. I remember saying that what the Commonwealth should have done was brought in an expert, for example, maybe somebody from Toyota who knows this tech stream, and have them assess it instead of somebody who had no idea what they were looking at. And I think we're about to see this here. I mean, again, it's not surprising, right, that the Commonwealth wouldn't do that, because you know what? They're not going to find anything that helps them. So, I mean, technically, if they did that, and it could have been a Brady violation. Like, if they did have someone look at it and the person's like, yeah, y'all's theory is wackadoodle, like there's no way, then that would be exculpatory evidence. They'd have to turn that over. So I don't know, but it's the level of sketchiness just knows no bounds with it.
History recording characteristics.
Yes, sir.
All right. Was that specific to dealing with vehicles and their interaction
yeah.
with other vehicles and or pedestrians?
It involved looking at the various triggers that system is capable of recording. And specifically, it was looking at what triggers a sudden braking event. So we were able to determine that those triggers, the sudden braking event, is triggered when a driver, or I should say the vehicle,
Objection.
reaches.
May we approach?
What's the objection, Lally? Oh, why are there freaking, no, go away. All right, let's get past this approach. Excellent.
May I-
No.
Yes, you
Thank
can
you.
move on.
Yep.
You've been qualified in other courts to testify as an expert in the area of accident reconstruction. Is that right?
He's
Yes,
laying
sir.
foundation. Okay, that was the objection. Then
You were not hired by the defense in this case, correct?
That is correct.
At the time you did your expert review, Dr. Wolfe, and your consultation, you and I had never met.
That's correct.
You did not know who I was.
I did not.
You'd never met Ms. Little.
No.
Mr. Unetti.
No.
Matter of fact, you'd never heard of this case.
That's correct.
They don't go into
You were
what?
hired by another agency not connected in any way to the defense. Is that right?
Correct.
The
and not
text screen?
connected in
Oh,
any way
okay.
to the Commonwealth. Is that right?
Correct.
So your analysis and your conclusions and your opinions are completely
I'm sure he knows what
independent
it is, though.
of the defense and the Commonwealth in this case. Is that right?
Objection.
Sustain, Mr. Jackson, you can
Wow.
ask it differently.
Oh, compound. Yes.
You
Toyota
did your
owns
analysis and
Lexus. Yes.
conclusions. Well, let me ask it this way. You finalized your report, you and your team, correct?
Correct.
That report is contained. oops.
Lexus is like a luxury brand with a
in a
Toyota.
multi-page document that was submitted following your analysis and your opinions and conclusions.
Oh, he does go into
Correct.
it. Okay.
We didn't. The defense didn't have anything to do with that, correct?
Correct.
You had never met us, didn't know who we were when you did this.
Correct.
DSN's
You never
got to
met
be
Mr. Lally,
here.
didn't know who
Somebody,
he was when you did
somebody
this.
Correct.
send him a
So your
message.
analysis, opinions, testing, and conclusions were requested by a completely separate agency.
That is correct.
Goes without saying, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. You haven't been paid by the defense,
You have not paid us anything, no.
and you don't work for us.
That's correct.
As a matter of fact,
Yeah, they'll be
I've
here.
never asked you specific questions
They'll
about your
pop
testing
in, I'm sure,
before
at some
today.
point.
That is correct.
Somebody can tag them on Discord, though.
Your work product, the report that you
So hold on, I was
provided
talking over
provided
that.
both to
Let me
the
rewind that
defense
real
as well
quick,
as the
guys.
Commonwealth. That you provided was provided both to the defense as well as the Commonwealth. Is that right?
That's my understanding, yes.
And you were equally available to both sides.
In terms of them reaching out,
Correct.
yes,
Wow.
And I called you ultimately after receiving your report, asked if
Yeah.
you'd join us and testify, correct?
that is correct.
He did not reach out. Commonwealth.
Were you and your team asked to undertake a review for purposes of accident reconstruction of the case that's now pending before the court?
Yes, sir.
Was your team asked to do
Yes.
this by the agency that
Get
ultimately
it.
retained you, not us?
That's correct.
Who at AARCA was assigned to the team who would ultimately undertake this job of accident reconstruction?
It was myself, Dr. Andrew Rentschler, and Scott Klein.
What was Dr. Rentschler's role in this case as it's distinguished from your role in the case?
Certainly. So Dr. Rentschler is a biomechanical engineer, and ultimately he assessed whether or not there was a mechanism for the injuries of Mr. John O'Keefe.
And what was your focus?
So basically, I'll just say real quick, just because it's so the reason they're gonna have two guys from AARCA. This dude deals mostly with like the car and how he's like looking at the car for this whole assessment, versus Dr. Rentschler, who will I'm sure testify after him, looks at the injuries to the person. So car versus person.
Focus. If he's talking about the injuries to Mr. O'Keefe, what was your focus in your reconstruction and your analysis?
I would simply say it was looking more at the damage to the vehicle.
Okay, so
Damage to the vehicle
in terms
versus
of your
damage to the
team-
person.
and the responsibilities of each of the team members, you were more focused on the damage to the SUV. Dr. Rentschler was more focused on the injuries suffered by Mr. O'Keefe, correct?
I think that's a fair characterization, although with the caveat that we worked together as a team. So we weren't isolated kind of in those areas, not speaking to each other. We certainly worked together on the analysis.
Understood. Were you provided or did you review certain materials in furtherance of your consultation in this matter?
Yes.
What were you provided?
We were provided photographs of the incident location. We were provided photographs of the Lexus. There were a couple of incident reports that we received. I could look at my report for the full list, but those
So
are the ones.
you can go ahead and do that, Doctor.
Do you have the report with you?
Yes, sir.
I have a copy of it. Is this faster?
Sure. If you,
May I?
Sure.
thank you.
How many categories of materials were you provided?
Provided, it would be approximately 10.
Could you list those off for the jurors, please?
It would be the Norfolk SPDU homicide death report, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Department of State Police crime scene report, OCME dispatch removal report, photographs of the incident location, videos of the incident location,
Okay, wifey, I love
photographs
you
of the
for liking
2021
you.
Lexus LX 570, photographs of recovered evidence, crash data retrieval report from the 2021 Lexus 570, report of
Which
autopsy.
is interesting because we were speculating about this last night. We were thinking that they were going to be calling maybe more witnesses, but yeah, no, I agree. That was my initial thought. Like if they only just called the AARCA guys, and then I guess we were thinking maybe like the Chris Van E dude, maybe, but then they called the Irish fellow, I guess, instead. But like that was my thought, was that they'd probably wrap up and rest by the end of the day, which case tomorrow would be Commonwealth rebuttal more than likely. So yeah, I mean, there's no point in calling extra witnesses than what you need. You know what I mean? Like, I would also say they're probably being considerate of the jury who's heard from so many law enforcement entities that to call in Chief Berkowitz, and I guess also the damage has already been done, right? Like the Commonwealth did their own damage in terms of look at all the law enforcement people that were involved in the corruption and just the fuckery. I guess they just figured it wasn't worth it, which, I'm sure they would have loved it if the Commonwealth had called him, But yeah, it makes sense. Just get in what you need from these experts and then get out, you know?
And autopsy photographs.
Based on these data that you were provided, were you able to satisfactorily, to your mind, satisfactorily engage in the consultation that you were hired to do
Yes.
and come up with some opinions and conclusions based on scientific certainty?
Yes.
Scientific certainty. I love it. Music to my
Did your
ears.
review seen photographs of the alleged incident?
Yes, sir.
What information were you able to glean or gather from your review of the photographs? What
Ah,
you seen?
Mhm.
not much.
So from those photographs, I was able to identify there was fragments of transparent red, clear plastic. There also appeared to be pieces of chrome and black plastic. I also observed what appeared to be glass fragments along with a black drinking straw.
Did you also review some videos?
Yes,
That was at the scene, maybe a leaf blower?
correct. It appeared to be daytime, yes.
Okay. What did you note about the photography at the scene of the items that were being photographed?
Well, I think one thing that comes to mind is it was a little bit difficult to follow the evidence, so to speak. So typically, when I go out and do an inspection, especially of a fresh incident, let's say I've got a debris field or I've got tire marks, what I like to do is kind of step into the scene, if you will, where you take global perspective shots and then you step into a specific piece of evidence so that you can, at a later point in time, identify where that evidence is. I noted that in a lot of these photographs, I didn't see a whole lot of that stepping in. It was essentially just zoomed right into where that evidence is, but not really having a great understanding of where was it relative to all the other evidence.
Or when it got there?
Correct.
Based on your review of all the materials that you described for the court, did you get an understanding of what the Commonwealth's theory of the case is, specifically that Mr. O'Keefe was struck by the Lexus SUV?
Objection.
Sustained.
Did you come to understand that the allegations before the court were that Mr. O'Keefe was struck by the vehicle?
Objection.
Sustained. Ask it differently, Mr. Jackson.
Did you perform an accident reconstruction specifically focused on determining whether or not damage to the Lexus was consistent with hitting Mr. O'Keefe?
Oh boy. Oh,
Also
That's
focused
oh,
on whether or not the injuries to
okay.
Mr. O'Keefe would result.
me neither, Fender.
Yes.
During your analysis, did
Yeah,
you note
tie.
the
You know what's-
damage?
His
to the vehicle?
tie looks like science technology, does it not? Here, let me pull down the banner so y'all can see his tie better. Like if you had to say, if the term science technology were like a tie, and you to try to visualize that, I think it would look like his tie, right? Do you all see what I mean by that? Am I crazy?
Vehicle.
Yes, sir.
Describe that, please.
So the primary damage was to the right taillight. It appeared to be fractured with the majority of the lens cover, so that clear and red plastic
fracture.
covering missing from it.
Way to say it.
In addition to that, if you're
Yeah.
looking at the back of the vehicle,
Yeah.
to the left of that, in the area above there's also another tail lamp assembly on the lift gate. So above that assembly, there was a small dent along with some paint.
Well, it also looks like light, kind of like light beams, you know, like lasers, but not green lasers, like regular light lasers. And that's, you know, he said he deals a lot with the way light works, so that makes sense.
Tips on the bumper, more so on the wraparound section as it kind of curves around to the right side of the vehicle. There appeared to be some superficial scratches as well in that area.
Was there any other damage or deformation that you were able to glean from your review, the photogrammetry, damage to the Lexus, the bumpers, the panels, the quarter panel, the sheet metal, anything like that?
No, the rest was remarkably intact.
Is it common in vehicle pedestrian collisions that there is some sort of bumper displacement and or sheet metal deformation that's concomitant to
Common
that?
sense would say
Absolutely. Assuming a pedestrian is positioned in a normal upright position, you certainly would expect to see damage to the bumper. In a lot of cases, what happens is, the bumper is just clipped on. So again, the force of that impact will oftentimes cause the bumper to kind of become unmounted or unclipped. You certainly could see deformation to body paneling, such as the lift gate or the quarter panel as well.
Is that especially true at higher speeds, meaning above 15 miles per hour or so?
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Was there any apparent damage to the Lexus that appeared consistent with any kind of pedestrian interaction that you saw?
No, it was really confined to just the taillight, a very isolated portion of the vehicle.
During your review and your investigation, did you note information concerning items that were supposedly found on the bumper?
Yes.
What was that?
I believe it was noted there was 2 apparent glass fragments located on the top bumper cover.
What's the significance of the presence of those items or the lack of materiality of those items in your view?
Well, again, I think it's going back to the scene evidence. Again, we knew that there was glass fragments, what appeared to be from a drinking glass, at the scene of the alleged incident.
Is there any glass consistent with the glass that was supposedly found on the bumper, in the taillight housing, the taillight mechanism, anything from the car, the Lexus, that would account for that glass?
Okay, I think I understand. So the taillight itself is not comprised of any glass. It is all plastic. So that damage, or I should say that glass on the top bumper cover could not have come from the right taillight.
Now, based on your review of the information that was provided to you, did you undertake any
I was
testing
gonna say,
of that vehicle?
I know
Testing.
I know I said that weeks ago when they were pulling out all that, they were showing us all these pictures, and I was like, that's not glass, it's plastic. If there was anything fishy going on with evidence being planted or what have you, my guess is that these idiots at all the different law enforcement people that were there had no idea, and they thought that a taillight had glass. Because remember the little video I did? It looks like cars are misleading. When you look at the bumper, it looks like metal, or it looks like a hard structure. When you look at the taillight, it looks like there's a lot of glass because it looks like it's got a lot of mirrors because it's so reflective looking. I know I've talked about this many times, but just to reiterate that, like I was trying to explain to y'all, but you can hear it from him, and obviously he knows what he's talking about. But like from my experience of cracking a taillight and being in a car accident and stuff like that, like he said, the bumper's clipped on. Yeah, it can fall off so easily. All this shit it's really like plastic. It's all just different types of plastic, basically, right? That looks like it's a substantial structure, but there's no glass. And I knew that, but those idiots probably didn't know that. And so anyway, I'm just wanted to throw that out there.
Concerning the damage to the vehicle.
Yes, sir.
All right, can you describe what that testing was?
So we performed, again, this is with Dr. Rentschler and I working together on this again. We performed projectile testing to the tail lamp with a drinking glass as well as a hybrid head form.
Let's take those one at a time. How would you describe the drinking glass test?
Certainly. So again, from our review of the evidence, we knew that we had an isolated portion of damage to Lexus confined to the taillight. So we know that we're dealing with potentially a small object that could have created that. Looking at, again, the evidence in terms of the scene photographs, we know that we have a damaged drinking glass at the scene in the vicinity of the fragments of the taillight. So the theory that Dr. Rentschler and I put forward is potentially an individual threw this drinking glass at the back of the Lexus, causing the taillight to fracture.
Oh my God, that makes
I'm going to interrupt you right.
holy shit. Hold on. Sorry, that makes so much sense. And how did we not think of that? I didn't think of that. I don't think I've even heard anybody think of that, like on LawTube or anywhere. That makes so much sense. That's like the obvious thing, right? Someone threw the glass and it broke the taillight. Holy shit, you guys. Brilliant.
Dr. Rentschler formed that theory and wanted to test that theory, correct?
Yes.
You were not told that theory by the defense because you've never met us.
Correct.
You were not told that theory.
Yeah,
by
no, I
Commonwealth.
agree.
You never met them, correct?
Correct.
Your theory was the product of simply having some
Yeah, I'll
facts
play it again.
extant
I'll play it
in the
again.
data.
I'll play it again because it's brilliant. Like this just makes so much sense. And how did no one think of this? I'll replay that for y'all.
Causing the taillight to fracture. So,
I'm going to interrupt you right.
in the vicinity of the.
Let's take those one at a
Okay,
time.
here we go.
How would you describe the drinking glass test?
Certainly. So again, from our review of the evidence, we knew that we had an isolated portion of damage to Lexus confined to the taillight. So we know that we're dealing with potentially a small object that could have created that. Looking at, again, the evidence in terms of the scene photographs, we know that we have a damaged drinking glass at the scene in the vicinity of the fragments of the taillight. So the theory that Dr. Rentschler and I put forward is potentially an individual threw this drinking glass at the back of the Lexus, causing the taillight to fracture.
Brilliant.
I'm going to interrupt you right.
This makes so much sense.
You and Dr. Rentschler formed that theory.
It
and wanted to
explains
test
the
that
glass.
theory,
It
correct?
makes so much sense.
Yes.
You were not told that theory by the defense because you've never met us.
Correct.
You were not told that theory by the Commonwealth. You never met them, correct?
Correct.
Your theory was the product of simply having some facts extant in the data. You had a broken drinking glass, a broken taillight. Let's put them together and figure out if the drinking glass could be responsible for the taillight, vice versa.
Makes sense.
Absolutely. Yes.
And that was your determination of, well, we were given instructions to reconstruct this. Let's look at every single angle, correct?
Absolutely. And I will note, as part of the engagement with the entity that retained us, we were asked not to do any outside research or investigation of the case. It was to be based solely on the evidence that we were provided.
Okay. As a matter of fact, and importantly, while you were doing your testing, had you ever even heard of the Karen Reed case?
No.
So getting back to that testing, and I interrupted your flow, you were looking at whether or not the glass could have produced the damage to the rear taillight that you saw, correct?
Correct.
And what did you do in furtherance of making a determination about whether or not that was possible?
Certainly. So myself and one of our lab technicians at AARCA, we designed and developed a pressurized air cannon. So it was capable of firing a projectile such as a drinking glass at the taillight. So it essentially, you think of it kind of as a giant cannon, but it had a barrel, and then there was a valve that would open rapidly, and directly behind that was a pressurized vessel. And depending on the pressure, the PSI of that vessel would determine essentially the speed at which that glass would be projected into the taillight.
So you literally built a cannon?
Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
That's epic. Oh my God, I love this so much.
Good job. Tell me what the results of your testing
Oh, yeah,
was with this
Jimmy.
pneumatic cannon that would fire.
Somebody should send him over here. I want to know.
Certainly. So we performed two different tests in terms of speeds. The target speeds were 30 and 40 miles per hour.
Why was that?
Well, so with consultation with Dr. Rentschler, he indicated that that is a reasonable speed at which an adult male, or an individual for that matter, could throw a drinking glass at the taillight.
Had anybody up to that point, anybody told you any specific, let's see if I can rephrase that. Had anybody indicated that there was any evidence whatsoever that John O'Keefe had thrown a drinking glass at the taillight?
No.
Was this another example of you and Dr. Rentschler and your team just exploring sort of every possibility and working a little bit in the blind?
Objection.
Wow.
Sustained.
What was the reason that you decided, or you and
It
the
was
team
compound.
decided that you wanted to approximate how a grown man could throw a glass at a taillight?
Well, I think we wanted to have an understanding is when a projectile such as a drinking glass interacted with the taillight, would we get damage on the test taillight that was consistent with that of the subject taillight?
Understood. So based on your theory, were you able to approximate the damage on the taillight?
Yes.
Describe that for us.
So as I mentioned, we ran two tests. The target speeds were at 30 and 40 miles per hour. And there was a little bit of variability in terms of what our target was and what we actually achieved. So the achieved speeds were at 31 miles per hour and 37 miles per hour. So there's just depending on how the glass leaves the barrel and some of the rotation can affect some of the speed, or ultimately the end result speed to that. So what I will say though is that with the 37 mile per hour projectile into the taillight, we noted and observed that there was damage that was consistent with that of the subject tail lamp, and that the test tail lamp had the majority of the outer lens fractured and missing, broken into pieces, as well as some underlying damage to some of the internal components as well.
Are you saying, well, let me ask a different question. You were able to replicate the damage to the taillight using a pneumatic cannon firing a glass at 37 miles an hour directly at the taillight, correct?
Correct.
All right. And that would also shatter the glass too, correct?
Correct.
Did you do any testing about whether or not that damage to the taillight could be produced by a person simply holding a glass and being hit by the car driving in reverse?
We didn't do any testing of that, and primarily because, again, if we're looking at the arm and its total length, right? We only have a narrow damage pattern, which on the taillight, if you think about where where it meets the lift gate into where it starts to wrap around to the side of the vehicle, that's only about 6.5 inches in width.
All right. When you fired the glass into the taillight was static. In other words, it was not going to move. It was immovable at that point, correct?
Correct.
All right. So the glass is hurling through the air at 37 miles an hour and hits the static object that's resisting. And that smash is what produced ultimately the taillight damage that you were able to replicate. Is that right?
Yes.
If a person were holding in his hand the glass and the taillight were to hit that hand, the hand would not remain static, correct?
Objection.
Sustained. Ask it differently, Mr. Jackson.
If the taillight were to
That's reminiscent of that be heard right there.
the taillight would make contact with a person holding the glass, would that replicate what you did in terms of you're firing a glass into the taillight? In other words, are they apples and apples?
No, I don't think it would be the same.
Okay. Why is that?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, again, the damage to the back of the Lexus, again, is confined to just that roughly, again, when we're talking about the taillight itself, that 6.5 inch section in width.
Right.
So it's inconsistent with the total length of the arm, and certainly from discussion with Dr. Rentschler, inconsistent with the injuries to the arm.
So given everything in your investigation was revealed concerning this testing, are you saying that the taillight was damaged by John O'Keefe holding a drinking glass that was hit by an SUV?
Objection.
Sustained.
In all the information that you were provided, you were not provided anything that suggested that John O'Keefe threw a glass at the taillight. Right?
Objection.
Sustained.
Their approach.
Yes, just, yes.
Okay, so I'm gonna go forward while they approach. I don't know why they objected to that. 'Cause-
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, here we go.
You are unmuted.
Ma'am?
Yes.
Thank you. What information, if any, were you provided that suggested that John O'Keefe threw a glass?
Leading, I think that's why they objected. Although you're
No information.
allowed to
What
lead.
information, if any, were you provided that suggested that John O'Keefe may have had a pneumatic cannon with him? Is that right?
I'm not aware of any information regarding that.
All right. You also did some testing concerning a drop test. Is that right?
Correct.
Tell us about that drop test testing.
Certainly. So again, through discussion with Dr. Rentschler, it was my understanding that Mr. O'Keefe had a skull fracture on the back of his head. So we wanted to do an evaluation of the interaction between the back of a head. In this case, we used again, talking about that instrumented dummy again, we used the instrumented hybrid head form to perform a drop test to evaluate the forces of an interaction between a tail light from the Lexus and the human head.
What height did you choose to perform this drop test?
7.5 feet.
Why did you choose that height?
Well, if you calculate it through physics and the acceleration due to gravity, that would equate to an impact speed of 15 miles per hour at that height.
And what was the significance of 15 miles per hour?
Well, that was essentially kind of a starting point for us, if you will. So I will tell you that in reverse, 15 miles an hour is fast. I don't know if you've ever looked at your speedometer when you're pulling into your driveway, reversing into a parking stall. Most people probably don't go more than 5 miles an hour or so. So 15 miles an hour in reverse is fast, especially when we're talking about, it's my understanding it was nighttime. There was winter conditions, potentially wet or icy roads. So again, that speed is going to be what I would say on the high end for going in reverse. So also, in addition to with respect to kind of just the nature of that speed, it's my understanding through discussion with Dr. Rentschler that at 15 miles an hour, you start to see significant injuries to the human body when it makes contact with a vehicle. And I think one last point is that we needed to pick a speed where, again, this is kind of just us brainstorming, where we would have damage to the taillight, right? It would fracture it, but it wouldn't completely obliterate it. So we knew if we chose a speed, for instance, of 40 miles an hour, we know we're going to completely essentially explode the taillight. But if we do, 1 mile an hour, we may not do anything to it, right? So we kind of had to pick a middle ground to again, cause damage to the taillight.
What was your conclusion with following that testing? What was your conclusion with regard to whether or not it was consistent or inconsistent with the damage to the truck? The taillight was consistent or inconsistent with making contact with John O'Keefe's head at or above 15 miles an hour?
So strictly speaking to a damage perspective, the 15 mile an hour interaction between the hybrid head form and the test tail lamp produced significantly more damage than that of the subject vehicle. So that indicates that, again, the damage on the subject tail light was less than that of the test tail light.
So if I were to ask you whether or not there would be more or less damage to the taillight if you increase the speed to 24 miles an hour, what's your conclusion?
Well, you're talking about significantly more kinetic energy. So if you just think about it from, again, a kinetic energy standpoint, kinetic energy is equal to 1/2 times the mass and the velocity squared. So if you're squaring that velocity and you're going from 15 up to 24 miles per hour, you're going to get a significant amount of more energy associated with that. Probably, I could pull up my calculator, but you're probably looking at 2.5 more times energy than the 15 mile an hour test.
Which means 2.5 more times the damage to the taillight?
Certainly.
Which you did not see in your review of the materials, correct?
Correct.
So what is your opinion or conclusion as to whether or not the damage to the taillight was caused by striking John O'Keefe's head?
From a damage standpoint, it was inconsistent.
I want to shift gears back to the injuries that you saw concerning Mr. O'Keefe's arm, his right arm. During the course of your investigation, did you look at photographs and investigate the injuries to his right arm?
Yes, sir.
What's the width of the taillight, specifically from where it meets the lift gate to the left side? I'm sorry, to the side of the vehicle, the right side of the vehicle.
To the right. So yeah, as I mentioned earlier, that is about 6.5 inches. It starts to wrap around to the right side. So really, it's even though the taillight continues, it's not projecting out on the back end where it's again wrapping around. So in terms of the width that is facing the rear, if you will, it's about 6.5 inches.
And you noted that there was a dent and some paint chips that you identified above the lift gate, correct?
Correct.
How far away from the right side of the vehicle were those scratches and that dent?
Approximately 20 inches.
What was the significance of that that distance?
Well, again, to go back to your question about, I think if somebody was holding a drinking glass, right, and their arm was extended to cause that damage, or if it's theorized that those dents and chips were from that. Again, the thing that sticks out to me is that you have essentially the Lexus taillight.
So ask another question.
What's the significance of whether or not there was damage between the dent and the taillight? In other words, that 20-inch area. Was it dented? Was it harmed in any way?
So in terms of, again, if we're talking about, again, looking at the back of the vehicle and we go to kind of where that right tail lamp just meets the liftgate, as I mentioned, there's another lamp assembly on the liftgate itself. There's also a chrome trim piece above that, and then certainly the body paneling to the liftgate itself. And I think what stood out to me is that between that dent and the fractured taillight, there was no observable damage to that area, which I would have expected had an arm been positioned there.
Can you calculate, or could you calculate, or did you calculate the amount of force that would be required to strike a person just only on the outstretched portion of his arm in order to project him a number of feet, for instance, 30 feet in one direction or another?
Okay, I just want to make sure I objection.
Lally,
Take a distance out of it. Break it down.
I'll ask you the same question, but
compound.
without the 30 feet.
Okay.
Were you able to calculate, or could you calculate the force that would be required to strike a person on his outstretched arm hard enough to spin him around and project him a number of feet?
If you're talking about only an interaction between the arm and the back of the vehicle, no, there wouldn't be any projection. Again, if you think about this, the arm weighs about, again, with Mr. O'Keefe would be about 11 pounds. So you still have, another 200 plus pounds being held down by gravity, and the force is only acting on the arm. So essentially the arm would be accelerated, but the whole body, because the center of mass is not being struck, would not be projected.
Is the absence of the damage that you described, the absence of damage that you described between the dent and the rest of the vehicle, with the exception of the taillight, is that consistent or inconsistent with striking an outstretched arm of a human being?
Objection.
I'll allow that.
That would be inconsistent in my opinion.
Woo. Here we go, guys.
They have just a moment, Your Honor.
Yes.
And what is your opinion, Doctor, as to the amount of damage that you would expect to see at 15 miles per hour or above on the taillight, if in fact that vehicle were moving in reverse and were to strike something on a human body, for instance, an elbow or an arm?
Objection.
I'll allow that.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Probably not.
Sorry.
I'm trying. Physics, that's why. From your testing, what would you expect to see in terms of the damage to the right rear taillight?
Yeah.
If in fact that taillight were to make contact with a part of a human body, for instance, an elbow or an arm, at 15 miles an hour or above, what would the level of damage be as compared to the damage that you actually saw?
Well, if we compare it to, again, looking at the drop test that we did with the hybrid head, which weighs about 10 pounds. So again, if we're talking about now a human arm that's comparable in that same weight, we certainly would expect to see a comparable level of force and damage. So as I mentioned, if the arm is outstretched across the right tail lamp and into the liftgate section, I would certainly expect to see deformation to that body paneling, even potentially the tail light on the liftgate itself and that chrome piece as well.
Based on the entirety of your investigation, your entire team's investigation, all the testing that you did, all the biomechanical testing and the engineering and the physics testing that you did, in your expert opinion, was that taillight damaged by striking John O'Keefe on the head?
Objection.
Sustained.
In your opinion, was the taillight damaged by either striking Mr. O'Keefe on the head or the arm?
Objection.
Sustained.
Same reproach?
Yes.
Yeah.
You are muted.
Approach. So my guess is that Lally's objecting because he's like, he can't make that conclusion because he's not the doctor, dude. But let's see what happens here. Wait, is that it? They go take a, hold on, let's just make sure we're not missing anything. I guess they're going to go take a break.
You are unmuted.
May I, Your Honor?
Yes.
Last question. Doctor, in your expert opinion, based on all your testing, is the
I'm not
damage to the
questioning.
taillight that you saw consistent with striking a human head?
No.
In your expert
Woo!
opinion,
There it is, guys.
the damage to the taillight consistent with striking a human arm?
No.
Thank you. That's all I have.
All right, jurors, we will take our morning recess.
All right, morning recess. We're going to come
You are muted.
concise, short, and sweet. Okay, so we'll go ahead. Hi, Abby. Happy you're here. Hi, Kid Smiths as well. Glad to see y'all. Yeah, I mean, yeah, of course, right? There's just a lot of problems. So we're going to skip past the recess. Oh, there's Lally. So now we have Lally on cross. So yay, not. I'm sorry to hear that, Abby. Can you do anything to cheer you up?
Now, you in conjunction with, I'm sorry, Dr. Rentschler, is that correct?
Dr. Rentschler, yes.
You know that's what it
You
is,
in
Lally.
conjunction, with Dr.
Keep your voice up, Mr. Lally.
You in conjunction with Dr. Rentschler and Dr. Klein wrote a report in regard to your analysis, correct?
Correct.
And doctor, that report was issued on February 12th, 2024, is that correct?
Correct.
I love it when Lally
And
gets
in the first paragraph of that report, the last two sentences, you or whoever the author of that particular portion indicates, this analysis is based on information currently available to AARCA and is only to be issued in its entirety. However, AARCA reserves the right to supplement or revise this report if additional information becomes available. Is that correct?
Correct.
And that's pretty standard as far as your industry is concerned. You can only work with the information that you're provided. Is that correct?
Certainly.
Now, in this instance, you were provided 10 things, and then there were 4 additional things that either you or the other doctors had reviewed as far as literature or things of that nature. Is that fair to say?
Correct.
And the 10 things that you were talking about were reports, an initial crime scene report, medical examiner dispatch removal report. Is that correct?
Correct.
Photographs of the incident location. Is that correct?
Correct.
And how many sets of photographs of the incident location were you provided with?
In terms of the number of photographs?
The number of photographs. Or were there different sets of photographs?
Yes.
And how many sets?
I don't recall off the top of my head. I know that there was a series that were taken during the daytime as well as ones taken what appeared to be in the early morning hours.
And you were also provided video from the early morning hours. Is that correct?
From what I recall, I think it was daytime, but yes.
Photographs of the vehicle, photographs of recovered evidence. Is that correct?
Correct.
CDR report from the 2021 Lexus LX 570. Correct?
Correct.
Autopsy report, autopsy photographs. Is that correct?
Correct.
And then some other things those would be the 10 things that you were provided with, and then there were 4 other things that you reviewed or part of your team reviewed. Is that correct?
Correct.
Now, in regard to there's a section in your report called Review of Materials, and it talks about photographs and glass fragments and plastic fragments and things of that nature, correct?
Correct.
You also talk about a black drinking straw that was recovered on scene. Is that correct?
Correct.
However, there's no mention in the report about Mr. O'Keefe's shoe or Mr. O'Keefe's hat. Are you aware of those items as well?
Yes.
And are you aware that Mr. O'Keefe's shoe was actually found dug out from the snow, sort of flush with the curbing in front of the area where his body was found?
Yes.
Now, over the course of your work as a crash reconstructionist, and again, I don't mean this in any way, shape, or form, but I'm just curious. Typically, you're reconstructing or you're looking at someone else's reconstruction in relation to something that occurred in the past, correct?
Not always, no.
Yeah,
my
Lally,
question is,
don't
are
get
how many
active to
times
know
have you actually
anything.
been on like a
Fucking no.
live scene where the vehicles are still in place at
Yes.
final rest, whether a
Yes.
body's in place at final rest? Have you ever been to a scene where those
This is insane.
existed?
Certainly. We have a rapid response team that essentially we've been on site on the day of or the week of the incident. Yes.
I know, Kid Smiths. I know.
Now,
I know.
how often is that?
Good God.
Not nearly as often as, like I said earlier, we primarily do litigation work. So again, by the time we're retained, obviously the scene has been is no longer present.
Scene's been cleared, items have been removed as far as evidence or other things. That's mostly what you deal with, correct?
Sure.
And as far as the hat that we were talking about before, is
He's not going to get
where that was recovered as well, same day as a drinking straw on February 3rd in the area where the body of Mr. O'Keefe was discovered.
In the area of the front yard, yes.
Now, you have some familiarity through working as a crash reconstructionist with pedestrian collisions, correct?
Correct.
Is it common or uncommon for in the course of a pedestrian collision, for a shoe or glasses or a hat or something to fall off of that pedestrian in the collision sequence near where the area of impact occurs?
Well, I think that depends on the interaction between the two. If it's more of a side swipe type interaction, if we're just talking about an arm, for instance, contact the vehicle, no, I would not expect the shoe to come off. If it's something where the entire body is interacting with the vehicle, then yes, there's a greater likelihood that something like a shoe will come off. Yes.
So that is consistent in general terms with the pedestrian collision of a shoe coming off, correct?
Again, based on the interaction between the two. I wouldn't say it's a blanket statement that, again, in all pedestrian interactions, you will have a shoe come off.
And that's not the question I was asking. So what I'm asking is it generally consistent
Fuck you,
with
Lally.
pedestrian collisions, the shoe may come off during the collision sequence near the area of impact?
Shoes can come off in a pedestrian impact, yes.
Now, again, you were testifying earlier about the damage to the Lexus being isolated in the area of the taillight, correct?
Correct.
And that was based on the information that you were provided, correct?
Correct.
Now, with respect to any of the materials that you were provided, was there anything in the materials that you were provided that indicated that just the arm or an outstretched arm of Mr. O'Keefe interacted with the vehicle?
No.
And based on your review of any of the materials that you were provided, was there any information stating that Mr. O'Keefe had been struck in the back of the head by the taillight assembly of the Lexus?
No.
And based on any of the materials, let me ask you, based on any of the materials that you provided, were you aware that Mr. O'Keefe is on video exiting from a bar minutes before crash occurs at approximately 12:11 a.m. holding a cocktail glass in his right hand?
I'm not aware of that video.
Yeah, it's irrelevant to his assessment. I mean, that would explain how it got thrown at the taillight, though, Lally. So I don't know if that's really the route you want to go. Fucking hell.
Now, other than the materials that we just went over, as far as the 10 things that you were provided, you weren't provided anything else, is that correct?
That would be correct.
And so sort of the questions that you endeavored to answer, those were questions that you didn't note from any of the materials that you were provided, is that correct?
If I understand your question correctly, there was nothing in the material
question.
that indicated the questions we were to answer, if that's what your question was.
That is my question. So there was nothing in there, is that correct?
Oh my God.
Correct.
Lally.
Can I have a moment, Sharon?
Yes.
Is he done? Be done. Please be done.
You talked a bit about, you have some extensive background in human factors, correct?
Correct.
And as far as visibility, in particular, have you ever conducted a visibility analysis?
Absolutely. Hundreds of times.
And you talked a little bit about conspicuity, is that correct?
Yes.
And part of conspicuity, at least one of the factors, would be a reasonable expectation of, in particular, when you're talking about a pedestrian collision. Part of the conspicuity factors would include sort of a reasonable expectation that a pedestrian would be in the path of the vehicle. Is that fair to say?
I don't understand your question.
When you're talking about conspicuity or visibility analysis, in particular, you're talking about something called PRT, or perception reaction time, correct?
Well, that occurs after recognition. So first, a driver has to recognize that there's a pedestrian there before they can actually respond to it. So once they've recognized the pedestrian, then you start the perception response time where, again, the driver has identified what the hazard is. They're making a decision about what to do. They might be moving their foot from the accelerator pedal to the brake pedal. So again, kind of that's the action or the time frame in which the driver is undergoing action to potentially mitigate the collision.
And perception reaction time, that's a pretty commonly used industry sort of standard as far as crash reconstruction goes, correct?
Well, I would say that it's used in the field of accident reconstruction, but as I mentioned earlier in my testimony, there isn't a blanket number in terms of perception response time. As I mentioned, it's based upon the hazard that the driver is presented with. Again, if you've got a pedestrian crossing the roadway, that's going to be one particular perception response time based upon studies and naturalistic data versus a driver suddenly stopping in front of you, right? It's not the same perception response time in every scenario.
Oh, understood. And there's different variables that may affect that as far as someone's age, as far as the lighting that's available, other things. Is that correct?
Sure.
And one of those things might be the reasonable expectation of a pedestrian being present in the roadway as you're driving along, correct?
Expectancy can play a role, yes.
In expectancy, what we're talking about is sort of the disparity or the difference between driving along a country road where there's no houses for miles and miles versus an urban area where there's crosswalks every 15 feet, correct?
Sure.
Now, in that expectation of privacy, how high would that be if we're talking about a pedestrian that actually exited from the vehicle that then strikes?
I don't understand your question.
Let me ask you this. If the operator of the vehicle has a passenger who then exits the vehicle and goes towards the back, would there be a high reasonable expectation that the pedestrian would be located in that area?
I don't know if I would classify it as high.
What would you classify it as?
I honestly don't know that I have a classification to it.
Now, you never looked at the defendant's vehicle in this case, correct?
Correct.
Are you aware that the defendant's vehicle is still in police custody and available for inspection?
I'm not aware of that.
Did you ever ask to look at the defendant's vehicle?
No.
Now, a typical pedestrian strike, for the most part, involves a pedestrian in front of a vehicle as it's coming down a street. Is that fair to say?
That can be one type of interaction, yes.
Is that more prominently seen as far as your field than a rear collision?
I would say that's fair.
And there are various types of sort of interactions that the pedestrian can have with the vehicle in order to cause and sort of sustain injuries. Is that fair to say?
What I would say is that there's certainly, in terms of how the pedestrian interacts with the vehicle, in terms of whether they're being wrapped onto the vehicle or projected forward, certainly there's different types of interactions, yes.
So there's like a wrap and forward projection type of collision sequence. Is that correct?
Those are two common, yes.
There's also something called a fender vault. Is that correct?
Correct.
And sort of how or where that pedestrian is positioned with relation to the vehicle is somehow somewhat determinative of the injury sustained. Is that correct?
It can be, yes.
Obviously, you're going to see different injuries if someone fender vaults and goes over the top of the vehicle versus someone who is projected forward from the collision sequence with the front of the vehicle.
Just to clarify, again, in this matter, I was not assessing injuries. That was Dr. Rentschler. I don't have an opinion.
What I'm saying is based on your experience, so that you understand that there's a difference.
Well, you could be opening the door here.
Based on the type of interaction that a pedestrian has with the vehicle.
Yes.
And then if someone is wrapping forward projected and then the vehicle overruns that person, there'd be a whole other host of injuries that you'd expect to see based on being overrun by the vehicle, correct?
There could be, yes.
Now, the testing that you did with respect, these are essentially experiments that you're doing, correct?
That's fair, yes.
And am I correct in saying that in scientific experiments or in the world of scientific experiments, there are certain things called variables that you're trying to account for? Is that correct?
I would say that's fair, yes.
And essentially what you're trying to do is control as many of those variables as you can in order to best replicate whatever the conditions were at the time that what you're testing to see actually occurred. Is that correct?
Correct.
Now, what, if anything, did you do to control variables in relation to temperature?
So one of the things we did with all of the tail lamp assemblies that we tested is that we preconditioned them to approximately 28 degrees, that they had reached a steady state temperature before we subjected them to the impact testing.
And where in your report does it say that?
I don't believe that's explicitly stated.
Is it implicitly stated anywhere in your report?
But again, I'm telling you, that's part of what we did for the testing.
I understand that's what your testimony is, but you wrote a report, correct?
Right, and I don't know that I detailed every single part of the test. Again, we summarized it.
Understood. So what did you do to control any variable as far as wind?
Well, when you're talking about a projectile such as a glass, again, that's being projected at 37 miles per hour, again, there would be probably minimal effects in terms of the wind.
Even if there was a blizzard going on?
Again, what we're going after here is ultimately conducting a test such that the drinking glass arrived at the location of the taillight. So if you're trying to say that, okay, he threw it this way and the wind blew it towards the taillight, sure, that could be a possibility.
And so I'm not trying to say anything. I'm just asking, are you aware that there was a blizzard and that there were wind gusts up to 37 miles per hour during the time that this collision occurred, and that's not accounted for in your test?
Were you aware of that, sir?
I'm aware that there was inclement weather at the time, yes.
Now, with respect to what type of glass did you use?
So we used a rocks drinking glass. So that's a glass that has a thicker base and a shallower sidewall.
And so what I'm asking, so was it cocktail glass, was it pint glass? What kind of drinking glass are we talking?
A rocks drinking glass.
And how tall is that rocks drinking glass that you use?
If I had to estimate, I think it was about 3 or 4 inches tall, probably.
And the thickness, did you measure that as far as the thickness of the bottom of the glass?
No.
Was the thickness of the bottom of the glass thicker or more thick or less thick than the top of the glass?
Are you talking about this in comparison to the sidewall of the glass?
Talking about in comparison to itself. So you have a glass, this rocks glass. Was the bottom thicker or the top thicker?
The sidewall would be taller, if you will, than the base.
And so when you're projecting this thing out of the device that you created, the whatever it was, are you facing sort of the top of the glass where you would be sipping out of, or the bottom of the glass at the tail?
So in the testing, the interaction between the taillight and the glasses was primarily between the base and the taillight.
Now, with reference to, I asked you a little bit about the video, and you weren't aware of Mr. O'Keefe exiting from the waterfall bar at 12:11 in the morning, about 15, 20 minutes before he struck by a vehicle. You're not aware of that?
I'm not aware of that.
Now, with reference to that particular establishment,
I
was
hate
there
Lally
anything
on
stopping
cross
you
even
or
more than on
the
direction.
doctors that you were working with from going to that establishment, finding out what kind of glasses they had, getting an actual cocktail glass from that establishment?
I had no idea that video existed.
Did you even know that Mr. O'Keefe was at a bar before he was struck by the vehicle?
I believe that in one of the incident reports we reviewed that there was, I think, a narrative about that they had been at a bar drinking. Yes.
How is it that you determined where on the taillight assembly to aim?
So we looked at the fracture pattern, and what it appeared to be that it was emanating from basically where the clear portion meets the red
He
cover.
does
We
get
kind of saw that the
nasty, but it's
fracture
still
pattern emanated from that. So that's where we
nonsensical.
targeted it.
It's just mean and
When
awful.
you did this testing as far as the sort of breakage or the pieces that came off
I
the vehicle,
know.
is it fair to say that they
That's
were
what I thought.
sort of different shapes and sizes, the broken pieces,
Sure.
consistent with the broken pieces that were found on the scene near Mr. O'Keefe's body?
Yes, I would say that's fair.
Now, I know you may not be the person for this, but just as far as your
Well, then don't
review of the
ask
autopsy
it.
report, medical
I
findings
swear to
regarding
God.
Mr. O'Keefe,
Lally,
Correct.
he better be
injuries
opening the
to Mr.
fucking
O'Keefe were
door.
primarily on the right side of his body. correct?
Nonsense.
Correct.
So there were injuries to his right arm and forearm, elbow area, correct?
Correct.
There was bruising to his right hand. Do you recall that?
Yes.
There was an abrasion to the outside or posterior of his right leg near his knee. Do you recall that?
I don't know that I recall that off the top of my head.
And do you recall sort of the skull fracture or the laceration that immediately outside of the skull fracture was on sort of the right back of his head?
Yes.
Now, from the reports that you reviewed, were you aware that when Mr. O'Keefe's body was discovered by the defendant and two of Mr. O'Keefe's friends, that the defendant was the only one who could see him in the conditions?
Objection.
Sustained.
As far as the lighting was concerned in that area where Mr. O'Keefe's body was found, are you aware there was no overhead street ambient lighting or anything like that?
Objection.
I'll allow that.
I'm not aware of that.
And you didn't do any visibility?
The entity that retained us in this asked us to evaluate whether or not the damage to the vehicle and the injuries to Mr. O'Keefe were consistent with the interaction or in interaction between the two.
So you were at least somewhat restricted in the scope of what you could do based on the parameters given to you by the agency that hired you. Is that fair to say?
Sure.
Now, as far as any statements by the defendant to investigating troopers either that afternoon or that morning when Mr. O'Keefe's body was discovered, were you familiar with any of those?
Objection.
I'll allow that.
I'm not familiar with it.
Sure.
They approaching? Yeah, approach.
So, doctor, with regard to the defendant's statements, at any point were you did you review materials or were you
Oh my God, you
aware,
gotta be kidding me.
the
How is he
defendant
getting
said
into this? This is
multiple people
insane.
on the scene,
He's
"I
getting,
hit him,
he's
I hit him,
what?
I hit him, I hit him."
I'm not aware of that.
Fuck. The court feed, Kitsmits, the court feed has gone wonky already. I don't know if that's what it was, but my guess is yeah.
Can I have a moment, Your Honor?
Yes.
Oh my God, what the fuck? Well, the drinking, I mean, at least has to do with the glass, right?
Within the report that you and the
Yes.
other doctors
I'll go back.
submitted,
Sorry, it seems fine on my end, so I don't know if maybe there's YouTube issues, but I rewound it.
can I have a moment, Your Honor?
Yes.
Now, within the report that you and the other doctors submitted,
Go back
there's an
more.
indication that
I'll go back more. They're approaching. They approached before this, though, I believe, but I'll go back more.
can I have a moment?
Okay, this is the sidebar. I don't know. It's supposed to be automatically adjusting the microphone. Let me see if the audio settings are messed up. It's supposed to be automatically adjusting it. I don't know.
You are unmuted.
So, doctor, with regard to the defendant's statements, at any point were you did you review materials, or were you made aware that the defendant said to multiple people on scene, "I hit him, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him"?
I'm not aware of that.
May I have a moment, Your Honor?
Yes.
Now, within the report that you and the other doctors submitted, there's an indication that if either Mr. O'Keefe's arm or head had interacted with a taillight, there'd be some expectation that either blood or DNA would be contained on that taillight. Is that correct?
I believe, yes, that was stated in the report.
And at any point were you made aware that Mr. O'Keefe's DNA actually was recovered from that taillight assembly from the defendant's vehicle?
No, I was not.
Well, as far as forensic reports, what, if anything, were you provided in reference to that, other than the initial crime scene report?
Are you talking about specific to the scene or forensic reports to the body?
Forensic reports specific to the evidence that was recovered from the scene and from the defendant's vehicle.
Only what would be listed in the report.
Now, you indicated as one of the materials that you were provided and you reviewed was the EDR, event data recorded data.
The crash data retrieval report, yes.
Now, were you shown anything as far as a crash reconstruction report from a trooper from the state police?
No,
And the EDR data that you observed, did that contain any sort of usable data?
there was no events recovered on the black box.
And with respect to there being no events recovered on the EDR or the black box in a pedestrian collision, is that unusual?
It is not.
And why not?
Well, because you're talking about, excuse me, a very large weight difference between the vehicle and the pedestrian. So ultimately, what the vehicle is constantly monitoring is acceleration, which gets back to a term called delta V. So when the vehicle doesn't experience a big delta V, typically the threshold for a non-deployment event where you're not firing airbags or any safety mechanisms, but the vehicle wakes up and says, hey, there was something that I potentially hit. And it's usually at a threshold of about 5 miles per hour. So again, given the weight difference, we usually don't see delta Vs that high with pedestrians.
And is that in some respects because what EDR and what the safety restraint systems are designed to protect is the occupants of the vehicle, correct?
That's fair, yes.
I mean, there are more innovations as far as vehicles that are more modern or released earlier that have certain pedestrian or protections for other vehicles, but primarily what they're focused on is the occupants of the vehicle, correct?
Correct.
Now, at any point in time, were you shown any tech stream data, Toyota tech stream data from the defendant's vehicle?
No.
So you weren't shown any data indicating that the defendant's vehicle was being operated in reverse.
The objection sustained. Next question.
So with regard to the defendant's statements, were you also not told that the defendant told several people that she had just gotten into a fight with Mr. O'Keefe right before she dropped him off at 34 Fairview Road?
So that's sustained.
Now, with regard to pedestrian collisions, you're familiar with sort of the physics term, I'm presuming, doctor, as far as like center of mass?
Yes.
And what kind of role does a center of mass for a pedestrian play in relation to the center of mass of a vehicle as far as how the two interact?
Well, it depends, again, on the vehicle structure. And again, when you're talking about where's the hood height, the bumper height, and the CG or the center of gravity of the pedestrian, that, again, will kind of dictate how they interact with between the vehicle and the pedestrian.
Now, typically, the typical pedestrian collision, again, that we were speaking about before, is in relation to a pedestrian struck by the front of the vehicle, correct?
Correct.
And so in a typical pedestrian collision, that involves more of an assumption of the velocity of the striking vehicle than you would see occur in sort of a side swap. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
In a typical pedestrian collision, that would involve more of an assumption of the velocity of the striking vehicle by the pedestrian than you would see in a typical side swipe collision. Is that correct?
If I understand your question correctly, yes. If the vehicle is striking the center of gravity of a pedestrian as opposed to just, for instance, a limb, yes, the center of gravity or the body will be accelerated up to that speed.
Now, with respect to the defendant's vehicle, again, you never actually looked at the defendant's vehicle. Is that correct?
It wasn't necessary.
And did you look at the actual taillight housing from the defendant's vehicle?
I had sufficient photographs of the taillight.
Did you ever look at the actual physical broken pieces of the taillight from the defendant's vehicle?
Again, I had sufficient photographs that documented the fragments and pieced them together.
And you're aware, at least, that the fragments that were recovered on scene were then sort of put back together and overlaid over the taillight housing that was taken from the defendant's vehicle?
Yes.
And through any of the pictures of the photos that you observed, did you ever see a piece of metal protruding underneath the broken and shattered plastic pieces from the taillight?
I believe it was a plastic chrome piece.
And when you were doing the testing as far as shooting the glass, the drinking glass at the taillight assembly, that taillight assembly was sort of held there by vice grips or something like that. Is that correct? It wasn't actually physically attached to a vehicle, the one that you were shooting at?
That's correct.
Now, as far as that, you're familiar with, there was a piece of a broken drinking glass that was recovered from the same area of where Mr. O'Keefe was found. Is that correct?
Amongst the fragments of the taillight, yes.
And are you familiar with Mr. O'Keefe's DNA being present on those pieces of the exterior of a broken drinking glass located near his body?
I don't believe so.
Now, as far as Mr. O'Keefe's clothing, his fingernails, are you aware that there was DNA of Mr. O'Keefe and no one else recovered from both his fingernails and from a variety of areas of his clothing?
Objection.
Sustained.
Now, from the crime scene reports that you reviewed, are you aware that there was human hair that was located on the right rear quarter panel near the dent that you were talking about?
Objection.
I'll allow that.
Yes.
Are you familiar or are you aware that subsequent mitochondrial DNA testing found that the mitochondrial DNA profile for that hair was consistent to a probability of 99.895% with the mitochondrial DNA profile of Mr. O'Keefe?
I'm not aware of that.
Now, were you also aware that the broken drinking glass with Mr. O'Keefe's DNA on it was found to be consistent with the broken drinking glass pieces that were found in the street?
Objection.
I'll allow that.
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. Were you aware that the pieces from the exterior of the broken drinking glass found near Mr. O'Keefe's body with his DNA on it were then found to be consistent with pieces of broken drinking glass that were located in the street of 34 Fairview Road?
Yes.
Yeah, guys, I'll pause it real quick. Hold on. I'll pause it so I don't ruin anything. So yeah, that does seem kind of weird. But so the thing is, though, that they had, as far as the vehicle data goes, who was it that they had from the defense? Or no, that was cell phone. I don't know. It was fuzzy. It was definitely fuzzy. You're not alone on that, Super Planner Girl. About that. Like that was because like whenever whoever it was from the Commonwealth who testified about the vehicle data, it was like in conjunction with the cell phone. So they kind of roped it all up into one thing. And like then what happened was I feel like the defense addressed that with their cell phone expert only. And because the whole thing with the vehicle and the phone was they were trying to place Karen there at the time, right? And like the whole question became about what time would she have had to leave to get home and to be using John O'Keefe's or to get to John O'Keefe's house and be using his Wi-Fi, right? And would that have been possible? So I feel like it kind of shifted, the attention shifted away from the vehicle and more onto the cell data. Is that what you guys remember? Yeah, right. I know. That's why it's fishy. It wasn't like clear. Like think about back to Murdoch, right, with the telemetry and how that they had several witnesses one after another come in because like good lawyers, they brought in everybody for the custodian of records from each place, and they went through the telemetry and it was fucking boring as fuck. But you know what? We had actual data in that chart, and we made sense of that chart, and it wasn't easy, but we did it. And I remember you were there for that Super Planner Girl. I'm sure others of y'all were there as well. But I would tell you what, like you really see the disparity in how these things are done, right? When you see it done correctly, even when it can be tedious, it's important for this reason, you know, because there's nothing concrete here. So
were you also aware that pieces of glass that you were talking about from the defendant's bumper were found to be consistent with pieces of glass recovered from the street in front of 34 Fairview Road?
Yes.
Were you aware that there were microscopic pieces of red and clear plastic, about a 1/16 of an inch by a 1/16 of an inch, that were recovered from Mr. O'Keefe's clothing that were then found to be consistent with Taillight?
No, I don't believe so.
Now, as far as, again, you weren't provided with any sort of reconstruction report from Trooper Paul from the state police?
No, I was not.
You don't want to go there,
Measurements
Lally.
From the ground to where certain items were on the vehicle?
The objection sustained. He didn't see the report.
I'm pausing it because I talked over it. But I was just saying, I'll rewind it. I said, you don't want to go there, Lolly, because he's like, did you see the report from Trooper Paul or something like that? Here, I'll rewind it for y'all so you can hear it. That's insane.
Pieces of red and clear plastic, about a 1/16 of an inch by 1/16 of an inch, that were recovered from Mr. O'Keefe's clothing, that were then found to be consistent with Taillight.
No, I don't believe so.
Now, as far as, again, you weren't provided with any sort of reconstruction report from a Trooper Paul from the state police?
No, I was not.
You're not aware that he took measurements from the ground to where certain items were on the vehicle?
The objection sustained. He didn't see the report. Sure.
I just want to say while they're approaching that I wish he'd been provided with Trooper Paul's report so he could tear it apart. Like that would be just really entertaining.
My apologies, Your Honor. Just,
Yeah, right?
Yes.
Well said, Kit Smits. Yep. I know. I know.
Now, Doctor, in the course of your analysis or review of materials here, were you ever provided with a video of the defendant backing out of a garage and making contacts with Mr. O'Keefe's vehicle in his driveway at about 5:07 in the morning on January 29th?
No.
Now, as far as from your review and your testing and everything that you did in this case, if a collision,
He would probably think he was being punked if he saw that. Really, legitimately think it must be a joke. Understandably so. If he saw Trooper Paul's whatever the fuck, I don't think he even had a report. Whatever the fuck he did.
occurred at a lower speed, say 1, 2, anywhere from 0 to 5 miles an hour, would that create the damage to the taillight that you observed in this particular case?
At that speed, no.
Then we can do our 2 o'clock.
So there were about 10 items that you were provided that you reviewed, is that correct?
Correct.
And a number of different items that I just asked you about that you weren't provided with, or you were aware of, correct?
I'm not saying-
Correct.
And again, in your report, in the very first paragraph, you indicate, however, AARCA reserves the right to supplement or revise this report if additional information becomes available, correct?
Correct.
I have nothing further.
All right, Mr. Jackson.
Thank you, Your Honor. Very briefly, Dr. Wolfe, you were asked on cross-examination a couple of questions about hair, DNA on the outside of the taillight lens, I'm sorry, the taillight housing, and glass material. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Does any of that change your opinion about your
There you go.
opinions and conclusions in this case?
Objection.
What
I'll
matters?
allow that.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
What is your conclusion as to whether or not the damage to the vehicle and the injuries to the human being are consistent or inconsistent with the vehicle interaction?
Objection.
Sustained. All right, Dr. Wolfe, you are all set, sir.
Thank you. No, I'll do it back there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Your Honor, we would ask Dr. Andrew Rentschler to join us.
Right,
Okay.
straight into it. No lunch. Straight into
While he's coming in, just very quickly about scheduling.
it. On the record.
You are muted.
Why never on the record? Judge Bev. Ugh. Okay, well, let's go forward. We're going right into Crash Daddy number 2. It seems. Smexcellent.
Your first and last name, spelling your last name.
Okay, here we go.
May stand and face the clerk.
You solemnly swear the evidence to give the court and jury in the case now hearing the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Thank you.
May I inquire?
Yes.
Doctor, could you please state your first and last name, spelling your last name to the record?
Certainly. Andrew Rentschler, Rentschler.
And what do you do for a living, sir?
I'm a biomechanical engineer and accident reconstructionist.
And who do you work for?
I work for a company called AARCA LLC.
How long have you been in that position as?
Oh, I didn't update my witness.
For AARCA, first of all.
I've been with AARCA for about 16 and a half years now.
And you indicated that you're the director of biomechanics and human factors. Is that right?
I am. I'm a vice president and the director of.
Go, we're on witness number 24,372,649. This is Crash Daddy number 2.
Biomechanics for the Midwest
Enjoy
Division.
the science.
Can you tell us what education, training, and background qualifies you to perform your
All of
duties
it.
as the director for biomechanics and human factors?
Sure. Well, I've got my BS in mechanical engineering with a minor in biomedical engineering from Carnegie Mellon University in 1995. I then went on to get my master's in bioengineering and biomechanical engineering from the University of Pittsburgh in 2002. And then I went to get my doctorate or my PhD in bioengineering and biomechanics from the University of Pittsburgh in 2004.
Doctor, do you specialize in research and analysis to evaluate specifically the study of the relationships between crash injuries and crash forces?
I do, yes, sir.
And when I say crash injuries, we're talking about to human beings.
That's right. Injuries to human beings, whether it be, in a crash, motor vehicle accident, slip and fall, industrial, any type of setting where there's an injury to the human body, I evaluate basically that event and the mechanisms responsible for producing those types of injuries.
Doctor, does it also include the study of and understanding of human kinematics,
It does, yes.
as well as human tolerances?
Yes, sir.
We all know what tolerances mean. What does kinematics mean?
So kinematics is really just the motion of the human body, and it's the study of the human body, how the body moves under different circumstances, whether you're in a car that's struck from behind, what direction will your body move, slip and fall, how will your body rotate and move. It's really looking at the motion and the response of the body.
Are you certified by any professional associations?
I have a PhD. There's no professional licensure for biomechanical engineering. PhD is the highest, basically, certification you can get. And I'm also a member of SAE, Society of Automotive Engineers, as well as the American Society for Mechanical Engineers.
Have you received additional training and education in further beyond your PhD and the associations that we've just talked about?
I have, yes, sir.
Can you describe, without going through all the detail, describe the kind of continuing education that you engage in?
Well, I attend seminars and professional classes with respect to biomechanics as well as action reconstruction, but looking at new technology and research with respect to injuries. For instance, motor vehicle accidents, if there's new safety measures such as airbags, seatbelt pretensioners, auto detection devices on vehicles. So really kind of staying up to date with the current research and literature that's out there.
So your specialty, your subfield, if you will, in terms of your engineering degree and education, is literally in accident reconstruction and the effect that accidents and incidents can have on the human body. Is that right?
It is, yes. And biomechanics is really, it is looking at injury to the human body. So, we use traditional engineering principles and apply it to the body, because an injury is just an engineering problem. Instead of looking at a piece of steel that, if you know the dimensions and size and you apply a force, it'll bend and break. We look at the human body. How much force does it take, and how does the force have to be applied to get a humerus fracture or intervertebral disc injury or any type of injury? There's specific forces and mechanisms you need to produce those injuries, and that's what I do as a biomechanical engineer.
Is there a difference between a biomechanical engineer and a doctor?
There is, yes.
In terms of injuries?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
So we really approach injuries from two different directions. Someone has an injury, you go to the doctor, you go to the hospital, the medical doctor will diagnose that injury, determine the best way to treat it, and determine what the prognosis is. As a biomechanical engineer, I look at that injury from a different direction. Here's the injury. Well, how did that injury occur? What type of loading did you need to actually produce that injury? How much force was required? What happened to your body to actually cause that injury to occur? So we approach it really kind of from two different areas. And certainly the doctors diagnose the injuries and determine what they are. And then the biomechanical engineer will come in and we'll look at that injury. And not only how's it produced, but ultimately our hope is to mitigate and prevent injuries from occurring, whether in motor vehicle accidents, sports settings, industrial settings, anywhere there's an interaction with the body and the environment, we want to try and make it safer for individuals.
So you're not diagnosing an injury as much as
You roll a
you are
sinker
trying to
place.
figure out the mechanics and the forces behind the injury. Is that right?
That's right. I'm not a medical doctor. I wouldn't diagnose an injury, but given an injury, I understand the mechanics of how that injury is produced and what you need to actually cause that injury to happen.
Are you also published in the field of biomechanics and or engineering?
I am, yes, sir.
Can you describe that?
When I did my graduate work at the University of Pittsburgh, I worked at a place called the Human Engineering Research Lab. And it was associated with the VA in Pittsburgh as well as the University of Pittsburgh. And so we looked at people with disabilities. Well, one of the big things that we did, or one of the major points, was people in wheelchairs. So if you have to propel a manual wheelchair, you put a lot of stress and force on the arm, the shoulder, the elbow, the hands, carpal tunnel. So we look at the injuries that are produced during those types of events. How can we reduce the force acting on the body for someone like that? So it's looking at, again, how the body responds, how we can set up a chair differently to actually reduce the amount of force someone might experience doing that type of an activity.
Have you qualified as an expert in the past in the area of biomechanical engineering and human factors?
I have, yes.
In furtherance of, let me ask it this way. Were you asked to engage in an analysis, AARCA, to be engaged in an analysis of the incident that is currently before the court?
I was, yes, sir.
Did you produce, or did your team produce a report about your opinions and conclusions, including the testing and the methodology that went behind those opinions and conclusions?
We did, yes.
You were not hired by the defense in this case, correct?
No, we were not.
You were not hired by the Commonwealth in this case.
That's correct. We were not.
When you started your analysis, you didn't know who we were. You did not know who the Commonwealth was.
That's correct.
You never heard of Jeremy case.
I had not, no, sir.
You were contacted by my office after you provided your report, correct?
That is correct, yes.
Were you ever contacted by the Commonwealth?
Not that I'm aware of, no, sir.
And you and I never discussed the substance of your testimony, correct?
That's correct. We have not.
Would you consider that your analyses, your conclusions and opinions in this case are completely independent of any party in this room?
Objection.
Sustained.
You've not been paid by the defense, is that right?
I have not, no, sir.
And you do not answer to us in any way?
I do not. That's correct.
You indicated that you and your team were asked to undertake a review of the circumstances. What exactly did you review in coming to your opinions and conclusions and performing the tests that you performed?
Well, we looked at, there was police reports with respect to the incident, medical records from Mr. O'Keefe, as well as the autopsy report, photographs of the evidence in this case involving the Lexus, the Taillight, the incident scene where the evidence was found, as well as some other documentation.
And you also worked with Dr. Wolfe, who just left the courtroom, correct?
I did, yes.
Did you two have sort of a distinct role in, although working as a team, a distinct role in making determinations and conclusions about the incident?
That we did. There was a distinction. Certainly some of our work overlap, but there was a distinction with what each of us actually did and performed with respect to this case.
Following your review and your investigation and analysis, did you make any determination as to whether any of the injuries suffered by Mr. O'Keefe in this case were consistent with producing the damage that was seen on the SUV?
I did, yes, sir.
And what did you base your opinion on?
My opinion was based on certainly the medical records, the description of what the injuries were, the damage that we have to the Lexus, primarily the right rear taillight cover, as well as we performed testing to evaluate the strength of that taillight cover and look at the damage associated with different types of impacts. And also to look at the overall evidence of where everything was found, where Mr. O'Keefe was found, what the injuries were, how they may or may not have occurred based on the damage we have to the vehicle.
So did you look specifically to find whether or not you could determine the forces required for Mr. O'Keefe to suffer the injuries that you saw in the records, medical records, et cetera?
I did, yes. I determined in my analysis whether there was sufficient force with that damaged taillight and interaction with that taillight to produce any of the injuries that were listed or diagnosed in the autopsy report and the medical records.
What, generally speaking, what injuries would you expect to see in a vehicle-pedestrian interaction at, say, 24 miles per hour?
Objection.
I'll allow that. Just generally, Doctor, if you would, please.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes. Sorry. I don't know why. I just saw it didn't have my comments pulled up. Okay. So I will slow it down and I'll go back and we'll see why that was sustained. Having said that, there's a lot of times when Judge Bev sustains things and there's no rhyme or reason that I can see, and I know I'm not alone in that. Let's go back here.
That was seen on the SUV.
I did, yes, sir.
And what did you base your opinion on?
My opinion was based on certainly the medical records, the description of what the injuries were, the damage that we have to the Lexus, primarily the right rear tail light cover, as well as we performed testing to evaluate the strength of that tail light cover and look at the damage associated with different types of impacts. And also to look at the overall evidence of where everything was found, where Mr. O'Keefe was found.
I just have to say I really like his tie.
What the injuries were, how they may or may not have occurred based on the damage we have to the vehicle.
So did you look specifically to find whether or not you could determine the forces required for Mr. O'Keefe to suffer the injuries that you saw in the records, medical records, et cetera?
I did, yes. I determined in my analysis whether there was sufficient force with that damaged taillight and interaction with that taillight to produce any of the injuries that were listed or diagnosed in the autopsy report and the medical records.
What, generally speaking, what injuries would you expect to see in a vehicle pedestrian interaction at, say, 24 miles per hour?
Objection.
I'll allow that. Just generally, doctor, if you would, please.
Yes, Your Honor. So 24 miles an hour, once you get up to that speed, you start to see fractures. You see significant ligament and tendon damage. I mean, usually about 15 mile an hour impact is where you start to see damage to, for instance, the leg and the knee. At that speed, you're going to produce, if you impact the vehicle, you're going to produce upwards of 1,000 pounds of force on the body, depending on what part of your body impacts the vehicle. So certainly at 25 miles an hour, you start to see significant injuries occur.
Is that true for any part of the body that is struck, whether it's center mass or an extremity? 1,000 pounds of force because of the speed of the vehicle?
Well, yes. So force is equal Newton's second law. Force is equal to mass times acceleration. So the acceleration is going to be the same. It depends on the mass of whatever body part's being hit. So from the testing that we did at 15 miles an hour, we used a head form, which weighs about 11 pounds. And that produced almost 1,000 pounds of force, a little under that for the head. So anything that weighs 11 pounds is going to produce almost 1,000 pounds of force. The heavier the object, if you get hit center mass, that's going to be even greater force because that's more mass than just 11 pounds. So the acceleration is the same for each body part. It just depends on the weight of the body part and how heavy it is to determine the force that's actually exerted on the body.
Did you review, in furtherance of your conclusions and opinions, did you review records that indicated injuries to both a head as well as an arm, right extremity, right arm?
I did, yes, sir.
Taking those one at a time, is the injury to the head that you saw consistent with having been struck by a vehicle at 24 miles per hour?
It is not, no, sir.
Can you explain why that is?
There's a couple of reasons. First of all, and the main reason is that to get the injury, it was a fracture at the occipital region of the head, which is basically on the back bottom part of the head. So in order to have that part of the head contacted by the taillight, you would somehow have to have a configuration or be standing in a manner that the rest of your body doesn't get hit because there's no other significant injuries to the body. If there's enough force to cause a skull fracture, then there's going to be certainly enough force to cause injury to the rest of the body. So first of all, you have to determine how could you configure somebody could actually be standing to have only the head impacted, the back of the head. And even if that was the case, if somebody positioned themselves in such a manner to have that occur, you're still going to see other injuries related to that. For instance, with the cervical spine, over 1,000 pounds of force acting on the head, you're going to get significant cervical injuries, fractures, disc injuries, tendon and ligament injuries. So the fact that we only have that head injury and only damage to the occipital portion of the skull is inconsistent in this case with being struck by that tail light. And then there's also the evidence that we saw when we did the testing at 15 miles an hour, where we dropped the head form. So that would be akin or like a vehicle backing up at 15 miles an hour hitting the head. We had more damage to the tail light in that test than what we saw with the subject tail light cover. So if you're going 24 or 25 miles an hour, even faster, you're going to see even greater damage, greater fracturing of that rear tail light. And we just don't have that in this case. So both the physical evidence as well as looking at the biomechanical aspects of it are inconsistent with that head injury occurring due to impact with the rear of the Lexus.
Shifting to the arm, are the same forces at play if instead of the head making contact with the taillight, it's an outstretched arm, for instance, at the elbow area of a human being, a person 73 inches tall, weighing 215 pounds?
Objection.
The objection sustained. Ask it differently. Mr.
Sure.
Johnson.
Shifting to the arm, are the same forces at play if instead of making contact with a head, you make contact with an arm, an outstretched arm?
They are. You know, I just explained the force is mass times acceleration. So if the arm weighs the same as the head, you're still going to get that same force, almost 1,000 pounds.
Does the arm weigh the same as the head?
It does actually, almost identical, because your arm, just one of your arms, including the hand, forearm, and upper arm, is about 5% of your total body weight. So for someone who weighs 216 pounds, that comes out to about 10.8 pounds. So your arm, basically your whole arm, is about the same, weighs the same as your head.
So is your analysis the same then if the arm, close to an 11-pound arm, made contact with the taillight traveling at 24 miles an hour, at 15 miles an hour, would you expect even more damage to the taillight at a higher speed?
Objection.
I'll allow it. Watch the leading though.
Sure.
Yes, you would. If it's higher than 15 miles an hour and you have an arm actually striking that taillight, you're going to get even more significant fracturing, more damage to that taillight at a higher speed than what we saw.
So was the taillight damage consistent or inconsistent with striking an arm?
Our findings was it's inconsistent for a number of reasons, but it's inconsistent with striking the arm. Yes, sir.
Okay. I want to shift back to the head injury that you saw. Was the head injury that you saw consistent with
Yeah, now we're
falling
on normal speed,
backwards
guys.
from a standing position onto a rigid surface?
That's certainly one of the possible scenarios that would create the injury mechanism. You fall backwards, strike your head on concrete. That can produce thousands of pounds of force on the head. And so that's certainly a scenario where you could produce that damage. If someone was standing, they fell backwards and struck their head on the roadway or on the curb or a hard surface.
So I was going to ask, I think you may have just answered my question. Those kinds of force multipliers require a hard and rigid surface or not?
They do, yes, sir.
So grass and dirt would not produce the same sort of force?
Grass and dirt, no, that would certainly not produce the same amount of force as hitting your head on concrete.
And if it was grass and dirt with a little bit of snow on the top of it, what effect is that?
That's going to dampen and lessen the force even more so.
What injuries, I want to shift back to the arm. I know I'm going back and forth, but bear with me. Talking about the arm, if presuming a strike at, say, 24 miles an hour on just the arm, what kind of damage would you expect to see on the arm, irrespective of the vehicle?
You can see significant damage on the arm, especially if it hits at that taillight. Enough force to actually cause fracture of that taillight, that force is going to be concentrated at an initial point. And you're going to see at that point, you're going to see probably the most damage to the arm and to the skin there. So remember, at 15 miles an hour, that's about almost 1,000 pounds. So 24, 25, it's even greater. So that amount of force on the arm, certainly you're going to see extensive subcutaneous lacerations, bruising, contusions. You're going to see most likely fracture of the arm as well. You're going to see significant damage. Just imagine having your arm out and being struck by a car at 25 miles an hour. There's going to be significant damage, more so compared to simply the abrasions that were diagnosed and documented on the arm in this case.
You did look at multiple photographs of the arm in this case, of the John O'Keefe's arm in this case, correct?
I did, yes, sir.
All right. Were the injuries that you saw on John O'Keefe's right arm consistent with having been struck by a vehicle in the manner that you just described?
Objection.
That's sustained, Mr. Jackson.
You reviewed injuries specific to John O'Keefe, correct?
I did, yes.
Taking that as a hypothetical, would the injuries that you saw, generally speaking, hypothetically be consistent or inconsistent with having been struck by a car at 24 miles an hour?
Objection.
Sustained.
May we approach?
Yes.
Okay, we will zoom. Yeah, they could have called AARCA for sure. Yep.
You are unmuted.
May I inquire on?
Yes.
Thank you.
Right.
If you were to presume,
That's important.
this is my question, that an arm was struck by a vehicle, taillight traveling at 24 miles an hour or thereabouts, would you expect to see patterned abrasions with no bruising?
Objection.
Or just what would he expect to see?
What would you expect to see?
So again, I would expect to see significant trauma to the skin, to the bone, to the tendons. I wouldn't expect to see just abrasions, pattern abrasions. I mean, abrasion by very definition means that it's trauma to the skin, which is created through rubbing or grinding or friction. So it's basically something rubbing against the skin that basically wears away that top layer of skin. It's not blunt force trauma. If you have blunt force trauma, that produces a contusion or a bruising. It's not a laceration type injury where we have a cutting injury that actually produces a cut or a significant laceration. It's really just rubbing along the skin. So that would be inconsistent. If you have an arm that's actually struck at 25 miles an hour, you're going to have significantly greater damage, especially if there's a taillight that shatters. So you have the taillight coming in, it's hitting the arm and it's moving forward into the arm. So if that actually caused fracturing of the taillight, then parts of that taillight are going to be pushed into the arm and likely embedded into the arm as the vehicle continues forward and pushes the arm out of the way. I didn't see any of that, basically just superficial abrasions, which all appear to have a similar amount of force. There's not a difference. That's the other thing. If you had a taillight shatter and explode on an arm, you would have some areas where you would have very deep contusions or lacerations, others lighter areas. But when you look at the abrasions that were noted in this case, they all appear to be of the same force, generally the same direction and the same severity, which would be inconsistent, in my opinion, with being struck at 25 miles an hour.
I wanted to let him finish his answer there, but did y'all hear what he said about the blunt object? Because I thought that was really interesting, because it was so weird how the medical examiner kept saying, Dr. Sprayville kept saying that a blunt object caused those lacerations. Did you guys catch that from before? And it was very weird because it's like, blunt object, what? Like a blunt object? And so I remember like Miss Little even used that terminology, like blunt object, such as claws, which is like, that makes literally no sense, but like, whatever, that's what she kept saying. And so I find this really interesting because he just, I can rewind it if you want to hear it again, but it was a long answer. But he said he distinguished what makes an abrasion from being a blunt object and would not make an abrasion, basically, right? Like he's saying a blunt object, it sounds like would cause a bone to break, right? That makes sense because there's more force, whereas something sharp would cause an abrasion. Right, it is, but their job is to be specific, like not just them as in the AARCA dudes, but like the ME, right? Like, I don't know, man. Like, in my mind, something that's blunt isn't something that's also sharp, but that's just me.
Generally speaking, do you look for consistency in size of an object striking a body and the injury that the body suffers from being struck by the object?
That might be right.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, size is a big part of it, certainly. Yes.
So did you do any measurements of the size of the taillight, the width of the taillight that was shattered?
Yes.
And what was that width, if you can recall?
I think the width we looked at was maybe 6 inches or so.
In review of your, in coming to your opinions and conclusions, did you look at the arm of John O'Keefe just sort of laid out, straight out?
I did, yes, sir.
Did you see where the injury started and stopped, or began and ended, however you want to put it, in terms of size?
Yes, I mean it started from the upper arm and then extended down into the forearm, which was greater than 12 inches of length, where you see those injuries and those abrasions occur.
Did you come to any conclusions or opinions concerning the size differential between the taillight and the injuries that you see?
Objection. Sustained.
Generally speaking, would you expect if there was an injuring event that the size of the injury would be consistent with the thing that produced the injury?
Yes, generally speaking, you would certainly expect that. And again, you would normally and usually be able to see an initial point of contact, because that's where the most force is going to occur, where it causes that taillight to break. So you would have an area of severe damage, and then it would extend out likely to the edges of where it would contact the rest of the taillight.
From a biomechanics and or a physics standpoint, an engineering standpoint, is it reasonable if someone is standing with their arm extended to be hit by a moving vehicle at, say, 25 miles an hour, and the body, the center mass of the body, to be projected?
Objection.
Ask it differently.
is it consistent in your view with engineering principles and physics principles that you know, if an arm is hit, extended, not the body, just the arm is struck, for the body then to be projected?
Objection.
I'll allow that.
It's not, no. So if we have contact, your arm's out, and we have contact to the arm. I mean, first of all, it's a ball and socket joint. So the arm can move independently of the rest of the body. So with enough force, even if you're contracting your arm and trying to hold it out as tight as possible, it's going to overcome that muscular contraction and basically just move the arm. But secondly, it all depends on your center of mass. The center of mass is kind of the equilibrium point of your body, of where your weight's distributed. And for most normal people, the center of mass occurs at your umbilicus or your belly button. So wherever your belly button goes, that's where your body's going to move. They teach this to football players, right? If you're a defensive back and a running back comes around the corner and it's you against him, they tell them, or they teach them, to watch the waist and watch the belly button. It doesn't matter what your head or your arms do or what their feet do. Wherever their belly button goes, that's where they're going to go. So that's what you want to tackle.
That makes sense, because I don't know anything about sports ball, but obviously we've all, I'm sure, seen people doing football, you know, even if it's just like in a movie. And that's so true. They go running over and they tackle at the waist. He's so right about that. I never thought about that.
So even if you had your arm straight out, again, we said it would move because of the joint. But let's assume you had a metal pole sticking out of your arm,
That sounds
out of your body instead of your arm, and that metal pole gets hit. What's going to happen to your body? It's just going to spin around, right? Because it's producing a moment arm, which produces a torque on the body. So your body's going to basically spin. In order to get the body, or the complete body, over, for instance, 10, 20, 30 feet into the yard, you need a force acting at the center of mass. You need an external force pushing the body that way. And that's not going to happen if you just hit the arm. It's not enough force. It's not the right mechanism to actually cause the body to somehow move that far over.
Assuming that a body was struck with enough force at center mass to project that body 20, 30 feet, what injuries would you expect to be produced on that body?
Objection.
Sustained.
If you did have a body that was projected a distance, what injuries from a car, what injuries would you expect to see on the body?
Objection.
I'm going to see you at sidebar the last time on this.
Another sidebar. All right, let's jump ahead.
Mind.
Sorry, guys.
Did have a body.
Your weight's distributed. And for most normal people, the center of mass
That must be a
occurs,
short
and that's
sidebar.
not going to happen if you just.
Hold on. There we go. All right, I'll just leave it be. It looks like it's a short sidebar, so. Yeah, Fender. So Fender's asking a question about sports ball. I don't know what the difference is between a running back and a quarterback. I don't think it matters. Just have you ever seen people play football, like even in a movie, as they go running, like one dude's running with the ball and one person's trying to tackle him, right? That's the whole thing. So one person's running with a football and someone else is going to try to come and tackle him, and the guy with the ball is trying to not get tackled. Think of it like a game of tag, right? He's trying to not get tagged. So the way that the dude's running with the ball, and the dude that comes to tackle him to try to get the ball aims for the waist, and they pull them down from the waist. It's total. I never really thought about that, but once he mentioned it, I'm like, oh my God, that's exactly what they do. The kicking version is just when they go to start, like they kick it. Okay, I shouldn't be speaking like this. I don't know anything about sports ball. They kick it, and then there's parts where they run with it. Like there's like a kicking part, and then there's like a throwing part, and then there's like a running with the ball part. Oh, are you thinking about soccer? So soccer, is it a black and white type of ball? That's soccer. Thank you, Fender. She says I still made more sense than Trooper Paul. Right. Oh, you mean okay, soccer. So soccer. Okay. So there's, in other languages they call it American football, because football is soccer in other languages, including Russian and Spanish. So right. So this is American football. American football are dudes that wear those big, huge. Hey, Fender, do a Google search, an image search for like American football player, and see what they look like, and see if you recognize that get up, because then you might be like, oh, those guys. because they have a funny outfit with a bunch of armor type stuff on. And that might help. Right. It just, Fender, your familiarity with everything that is like American or English is so good. I just assumed you knew what I meant. I'm well aware that everybody else calls it football for soccer, but do a Google search and for like an American football player, and it should come up with a dude wearing like a big outfit with a bunch of shit on him. And yeah, rugby is pretty similar, I think. I mean, even if you do a Google search for like an American football player, you'll probably see a picture of somebody doing exactly what he's describing, where they're going to tackle him from the waist. Seriously, it's like that iconic. I just never thought about it. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and play this. I'm not going to try to skip it because it must be a short sidebar, because every time I tried to skip it, it went too far. Yeah, already done.
You are unmuted.
May I, Your Honor?
Yes.
Doctor, do you have my question in mind? You need me to repeat it?
Maybe repeat it, yeah.
Easy for you to say. Assuming that a body was struck center mass with enough force from a vehicle traveling at whatever speed to project the body off the ground.
I'm just pausing it real quick to say that Alan won that sidebar because he's getting asked the question.
Would you expect to find injuries on that body?
Right.
You would, and you would actually see that there's specific injuries, because let's say you're standing forward and you get hit on the right side with a vehicle. You're going to get injuries and damage to the right side of the vehicle as that vehicle impacts you. It depends on the profile of the vehicle, how high the hood comes up, whether you're going to wrap up onto the hood, or if it's a van or the back of an SUV, it will project or push your entire body to the left. So you're going to get initial contact and injuries to the right side of your body. And then if it propels you into the air, you're going to get airborne, and then you're going to contact the ground, usually with the left side of your body. So then we're going to see a correlation of injuries to the left side of your body as it slams down onto the ground as well. And at those speeds, normally you would also see more abrasions, greater abrasions or road rash along the entire part of the body, as your body then would slide until it came to the point of rest.
Okay, and pause it real quick to say something. So I'm not surprised that Alan won that sidebar, and here's why. Because the sports ball thing is a great way for the jury to understand what he's talking about, because most people on that jury are going to be very familiar with football, especially because they're all, in the Boston area. I believe they're like extra sportsy out there, and they love their sports ball. But also the other reason is because this dude has all this experience working with athletes. Remember, we heard about his testing done with hockey players and whatnot. So, I mean, clearly, right? Like, my guess, I wouldn't be surprised if this dude has experience working with, they designed the football player helmets for American football. Again, just to clarify, those helmets are a big deal. I'll actually speak to this briefly when it comes to bicycles, because like it used to be that helmets were just made to be hard so that like it's supposed to protect your head. But then they realized that what was happening is if people fell, the hard surface of the helmet could actually cause the injury. So now the kind of helmets they make, at least for bicycles, are like, they have this, I forget what it's called. It's like a suspension system in there or whatever. So that it's like, it's like just, I don't know. It's like the force is distributed, and it's a completely different, it's like rethinking the whole point of a helmet. Like, the point of the helmet isn't to put an armor around the head. It's to disperse the force in a certain way that it won't be damaging, type of thing. And like with football player helmets, I mean, y'all know football players are the whole part. It's actually really tragic because they get head injuries so bad that a lot of them end up like doing terrible things. And anyway, that's a whole other story. But there you go, Candace. Yeah. Candace says that her bike helmet saved her life when she got hit. Yeah. So I wouldn't be surprised if this dude has experience with that type of stuff. And then of course football players are so prone to just devastating injuries that it makes sense that this dude would actually have experience with it. But he can use it as a way to just give the jury a helpful analogy, Right.
You did not see that in this case.
Objection.
Okay.
May I have a moment, Your Honor?
Yes.
Fender, did you look up a picture of an American football player?
Thank you, Your Honor. I have nothing further to say.
Mr. Lally?
All right, we're on to. Why does it say cross-examination? I'm so, hold on. Did I forget
Good
to?
afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Now it's cross.
Now,
You know, it's just so confusing because we're so used to Lally being on direct. I'm sorry that said direct on the, or I'm sorry it said cross on the banner. Now it's cross. I thought I edited it. I guess I just edited the witness number and the name. Anyway, now we're on to cross. It's just everything feels so backwards. And it felt backwards before anyway, because Lally was the Commonwealth as the prosecution, yet putting on a defense. So it's my brain. It's going to be hard to keep. I know y'all are having trouble with it as well.
you
Anyway,
in conjunction
it is cross.
with the other doctors on your team
Right.
that
Yes.
conducted the analysis and testing in this case, you wrote a report, is that right?
We did, yes, sir.
And that report, excuse me, was issued
Are you
on
the offender?
February 12th,
Morning.
2024, is that correct?
I believe that's correct, yes.
And within the first paragraph of that report, the last two sentences state, this analysis is based on information currently available to AARCA and is only to be limited,
Fuck
excuse
you,
me, only
Lally.
to be issued in its entirety. However,
I hate
AARCA
him.
reserves
I
the
hate
right
Lally.
to supplement
I
or
hated him
revise this
before.
report if additional information becomes available. Is that correct?
I hate
I
him.
believe that's correct, yes, sir.
I hate him in a new way now.
Now, the information that you received and that you reviewed either individually or as a team, that included some state police reports. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Some Canton Police Department reports, correct?
Yes,
Some scene photos. Is that correct?
that's correct, yes.
Medical examiner dispatch removal report. Is that right?
I believe so, yes, sir.
Some videos from the location of 34 Fairview Road. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Some
Right.
photographs of the defendant's vehicle, the 2021
Right.
Lexus LX
Thank you,
570. Is
Fender.
that correct?
Fender corrected me. She's right. That's what it was. The brain inside the skull. Correct. That's what it is. The brain inside the skull. The skull is basically a helmet for the brain. So to put a helmet around the helmet, which didn't make any sense. So yeah, hopefully that makes sense. But Kitsmith, you read my mind. I literally was just, it's funny. I was doing the timestamps for Proctor from last night on our recap. And literally as I'm going through it, I'm listening to him one after another. He's like, we did this, we did that. We work as a team. It's a group effort, blah, blah. Literally, I was just thinking that and you just beat me to it. But yeah, it's insane.
Yes, sir.
Photographs of evidence that was recovered from the scene. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
CDR report from the defendant's Lexus.
You guys want me to put it on
Yes.
1.25?
And then essentially there were some other materials, whether they be literature or other things that you and your team of other doctors reviewed over the course of formulating your opinions in this case. Correct?
That's correct, yes, sir.
Now,
Yes.
in regard to evidentiary
Holy-
materials
holy dead.
that indicates within
right.
the report that were reviewed, you talk about the lens cap to the taillight assembly, the taillight assembly photographs of that nature, and then there's a mention of a black straw that was found on scene. Correct?
Ugh.
Yes, sir.
There's no mention in the report of either Mr. O'Keefe's shoe or his
No.
hat. correct?
Objection. Maybe approach.
Yes.
No, like, hold on, let me back it up real quick because this dude is like falling asleep right behind Lally. It's like as soon as Lally starts talking, here, check it out. Let me back it up a smidgen. As soon as Lally starts talking,
In this case,
oops,
that's correct.
That's correct, yes, sir.
hold on.
Now,
Okay.
in
Watch
regard to
this guy.
evidentiary materials
this guy.
that indicates within the report that were reviewed, you talk about
Watch.
the lens cap to the taillight assembly photographs of that nature, and then there's a mention of a black straw that was
Look,
found
look,
on
look.
scene. Correct?
Yes, sir.
There's no mention in the report of either Mr. O'Keefe's shoe or his hat. Correct?
Objection. Maybe approach.
Yes.
Oh man. Well,
You are muted.
I thought so because they kind of look alike. Okay, let's jump ahead. Yeah, Lally. It's a little longer one. Oops. All right, here we go. Cool. Yeah, Jan, that's
Are you familiar with a term called compression
Thunder.
abrasions?
correct.
Compression abrasions?
Yes.
Yes.
And am I correct when I say compression abrasions are essentially when direct pressure from a blunt object together with slight rubbing movements produce skin?
I feel so bad for this dude. This dude is like a legit, actual professional. It's like this is when you think about Lally's questioning and just this case in general, this case, honestly, I'm insulted and offended on his behalf that he has to sit here and be questioned by Lally. In honesty, it's like, this is offensive because it's like, it's like, how to even explain it? I don't even know how to explain it. It's like, I don't even know. It's like, what's below amateur? What's below amateur? If there's whatever it is that's below amateur, novice, what's below novice? We need to go below novice, lower than novice, guys, right? Coming in, acting like they know better than like the highest level of expert. And the expert is like just genuinely like trying to do their best and like probably expecting normal stuff that they're used to, like actually intelligent and informed questions and like whatever. And I just feel so bad for him. I just feel so bad for him. Do you guys feel bad for him also? Like just looking at him like, because he just comes across as really wanting to help. And I don't know, man. It's really hard. There was a forensic pathologist. There can only be one ME because remember the ME is the title given by the government. That's the difference between an ME and a forensic pathologist. So there was a forensic pathologist, not an ME, because there's only one ME. There was a forensic pathologist that they hired privately that was testifying while my power was out, but I didn't cover it because there's some interesting moments, but it's not as groundbreaking as these guys. And by the time my power came back on, they were into the AARCA dudes, and that's what I really wanted to go to. So, and I figured y'all were probably already listening to the trial or watching the trial anyway, and we're already seeing that dude before my power came back on. But yeah, we could, if we have time, we'll go back during the lunch break. There were some salient, it's the type of thing where I was like, oh yeah, I could see recapping it because there was a lot of it that was just sort of like, you know, kind of, I don't know, maybe a little bit redundant or whatever. But like, then there were some actually interesting moments, usually, you know, like Lally fucking up and stuff like that. But yeah, so, yeah, I know. Somebody else was asking if I did the forensic pathologist, and I was like, I assumed you guys wouldn't want me to. That's basically what I was thinking. I was like, I assumed you guys wouldn't want me to. And I do also, I don't know what will be happening tomorrow. Maybe tomorrow will be rebuttal, but I do intend to stream tomorrow as well. I mean, my tolerance for Lally is just like with y'all is kind of wearing thin to where if it's going to be a lot of nonsensical lollygaggling, I don't know. We'll see. We'll just see how much I can tolerate. But I am available and planning to try to stream tomorrow as well. So.
And epidermal crushing, is that what your understanding of the term is?
Yes, sir.
And you're familiar with pattern abrasions?
Fingers crossed.
I am, yes.
Defender.
And pattern abrasions are injuries that show a distinct pattern that may reflect the shape of the impacting blunt objects that you may see with reference to injuries that are left by that blunt object. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Dog claws? What is he talking about?
Now, as far as in general terms, from what you reviewed, at any point in time, did you look at a state police reconstruction report?
I don't believe that I did, no, sir.
You weren't provided with that, is that correct?
That's correct.
It's so insane. Why the fuck is Lally asking him the same thing? Lally, you do not want them to look at that. Trust me. Trust me. I wish they had looked at it, honestly. It would have been a waste of their time, but it would have been, like we said, it would have been really fucking entertaining and to see their reaction. Yeah, we can go back. He was asking if he looked at the Trooper Paul's fucking bullshit, basically.
Doctor, are you familiar with a term called compression abrasions?
Compression abrasions?
Yes.
Yes.
And am I correct when I say compression abrasions are essentially when direct pressure from a blunt object together with slight rubbing movements produce skin and epidermal crushing? Is that what your understanding of the term is?
Yes, sir.
And you're familiar with pattern abrasions?
I am, yes.
And pattern abrasions are injuries that show a distinct pattern that may reflect the shape of the impacting blunt objects that you may see with reference to injuries that are left by that blunt object. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes, sir.
Now, as far as in general terms, from what you reviewed, at any point in time, did you look at a state police reconstruction report?
I don't believe that I did, no, sir.
You weren't provided with that, is that correct?
That's correct. I don't believe so.
You weren't provided with any sort of forensic reports, DNA or anything like that, is that correct?
I don't believe so, no, sir.
You never actually looked at the physical car, is that correct?
I did not. That's correct.
And you're aware that the physical car, being the defendant's car, is still in law enforcement custody and available for inspection if you had wanted to? Are you aware of that?
I think I'm aware of that. Yes, sir.
But you never made that request, is that correct?
That was not necessary in this case to inspect the vehicle.
Whether it's necessary or not, you didn't make that request, correct?
I don't remember if we made that request or not. We obviously didn't look at the vehicle, but it wasn't necessary in this case.
Did you ever look at the actual taillight pieces or the taillight housing, is that correct?
Not the actual. We looked at photographs of the evidence. Yes.
Now, the injuries that you observed or reviewed in materials in regard to Mr. O'Keefe were primarily on the right side of his body, is that correct?
Well, sir, on the right arm and the posterior aspect of the right arm, yes. And then the skull fracture was a little bit to the right, the occipital fracture. I believe.
Also bruising on his right hand, is that correct?
There was bruising on the back of his right hand,
On the
yes.
dorsal aspect?
Yes, correct.
And there was also bruising on sort of the posterior of his right knee, is that correct?
There was a small bruise, I believe, yes, sir.
Now, with respect to within your report, you talk about the numerous linear abrasions on the posterior of Mr. O'Keefe's right arm and forearm, correct?
Yes, sir.
And in relation to those injuries, there is a sentence in which you or whoever authored this part of the report, I'm assuming it's you, indicate that furthermore, any such injuries would be highly improbable if Mr. O'Keefe was wearing a jacket, correct?
Yes, sir.
Are you aware that Mr. O'Keefe was not wearing a jacket other than a long sleeve sort of hooded shirt?
I believe that came to light afterwards. Again, it doesn't affect my actual opinions in this case, but it was a sentence added in there, yes, sir.
And so also within your report, same paragraph, you indicate blood and DNA transfer would also be highly probable under such circumstances, none of which were reportedly found on the tail lamp assembly or any of the fractured pieces, correct?
Correct.
Are you aware that DNA consistent with that of Mr. O'Keefe was actually found on the taillight housing from the defendant's vehicle?
I'm aware after we wrote or issued the report that it became known to us that I believe DNA was tested and some DNA was found, I believe a small amount. I don't believe any blood evidence was located or found on any pieces, but there was indication of DNA on the taillight housing.
There was also DNA matching Mr. O'Keefe that was found on the exterior of a piece of drinking glass that was found right near his body.
I believe so, yes, sir.
And there was also pieces of approximately 1/16 of an inch by 1/16 of an inch of clear and red plastic that was subsequently found to be consistent with the defendant's taillight that was found embedded within Mr. O'Keefe's shirt.
Within the shirt, I believe, yes, sir. Not his actual body.
And so this is all things that you found out after you issued your report in February of 2024, correct?
That's correct, yes, sir.
Now, when you were talking about the injuries to the back of the head of Mr. O'Keefe, consistent with coming in contact with a hard surface, correct?
Yes, sir.
Would that hard surface include if the ground was frozen?
Well, you'd have to perform an analysis actually, because you'd have to determine how hard that ground was. You'd have to look at the freeze and thaw cycle, probably leading up to weeks of that. You can't just look at ground and say, well, it's below freezing, so that ground must be frozen. I mean, is it a possibility? It may be, but you have to go through an actual analysis and procedure to determine how hard that ground is and whether it could have produced those injuries.
So it is something that's capable of being done by you, is that correct?
Performing that type of an analysis? You could go through and do it, sure, yeah.
But you didn't do it, correct?
No, I did not do it. No, because there's no need in this case. We don't know what happened in this case. There's no indication of, certainly it's not consistent with getting hit by the car and ending up where he did, even if the ground is somehow hard enough to cause that type of an injury. Again, there's no movement and no force to get his body over there. And the damage with the car is inconsistent with him being struck by it. So whether the ground could cause it or not, the roadway could cause it, the curb could cause it, a back could cause it. There's numerous different possibilities, and we don't really have enough evidence in this case to determine what one specific event actually caused that injury.
You didn't have enough evidence based on what you were provided. Isn't that fair to say?
I didn't have enough evidence based on what I was provided, and even looking at the additional evidence that I became aware of after the fact, there's still no evidence. I mean, you can't deny the science and the physics as to what would have happened if he was struck by the vehicle. So anything past that, you have to somehow overcome that hurdle, which is very difficult to do.
Right.
When was it that you looked at this additional material and who provided it to you?
We were informed after a report was issued that DNA was found And that was really the primary issue. I believe that some DNA was found on the housing, which again, there's numerous explanations or ways that DNA can get on a light housing.
Let me ask you this, sir. With regard to
He's going to
materials
start
that
to
you
get
were provided,
frustrated with Lolly as
was there anything in there that stated that Mr. O'Keefe's skull fracture on the back of his head was caused by contact with the taillight?
No, I don't believe there was anything in those materials that
Is
stated
there
that.
anything in those materials that indicated or that anyone stated at any point in time that Mr. O'Keefe's arm was outstretched at the time that he was struck by the vehicle?
No, sir, there wasn't.
Was there anything in there indicating that his arm was tucked in at the time that he was struck by the vehicle?
You know, there's no indication in any of that evidence of what he may or may not have been doing, how he may or may not have been positioned. I mean, that's the whole issue. There's no evidence to indicate what may have allegedly occurred in this case.
Hey,
Typical
hey,
pedestrian collision,
sorry.
that you
pausing it for something important there. He just quoted Lolly without even realizing it because he doesn't know. He's not watched this trial. However,
There's no evidence of anything in this case.
well said, Lolly. The only thing he ever said that was accurate.
see through the course of your work involves a pedestrian being struck by the front of a vehicle. Is that fair to say?
No, I see all types of different people getting run over backwards, cars spinning, hitting sideways, frontal impacts certainly occur, yes, but we see pedestrians getting struck by all parts of the vehicle.
I'm sure you see all kinds. What I'm asking is predominantly when you see a pedestrian collision, the typical pedestrian collision would be a pedestrian crossing a road in front of a vehicle as it's approaching. Is that correct?
That's certainly not uncommon, yes, sir.
Now, as far as, I believe you described a little bit on your direct testimony, as far as there's differences in the type of injuries that you would expect or anticipate depending on how the vehicle interacted with the pedestrian in a pedestrian collision, correct?
Yes, sir.
And as far as, you familiar with what's called the side swipe collision?
Yes, sir, I am.
And am I correct when I say that in a typical pedestrian collision with pedestrian crossing in front of a vehicle, there are a number of different types of interactions as far as a wrap and a forward projection versus a fender vault versus a number of different ways that a pedestrian can interact with the front of a vehicle, correct?
It depends on the position of the pedestrian and certainly the profile of that vehicle and the speed of the vehicle. Yes, sir. There's many different factors involved in it.
And so in a typical pedestrian collision, when a pedestrian is struck by the front of the vehicle, that involves more of an assumption of the velocity of the striking motor vehicle by the pedestrian than you would expect to see in a side swipe collision, correct?
Well, I mean, yes, generally speaking, a side swipe means that the person or the pedestrian in the vehicle don't obtain a similar or common velocity. So if you're standing in front of a car and it hits you, it's going to speed you up to that same speed and then disengage. Side swipe means that there's not this mass-to-mass impact. By its very nature, side swipe has minimal forces. We see it even between vehicles that just rub against each other. So if there's a side swipe impact with a pedestrian in a vehicle, there's going to be very little damage to the pedestrian. And similarly, there's going to be very little movement. There's really no force at all acting. You know, for instance, if a car came and swiped by your arm, but didn't have enough force or enough contact to cause any damage, well, it wouldn't actually cause any movement of the person either. So a side swipe by its very nature involves minimal impact, minimal forces, minimal velocities.
Also contained in the report that you at least co-authored, there's an indication that Mr. O'Keefe's injuries, at least to his skull, the fracture to his skull, are consistent with him having been pushed or possibly been impacted by the subject Lexus and fallen backwards, striking his head. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, so that's another possibility.
Sorry, sir, yes or no?
No, let him answer. Let him answer the question.
So if we're saying that there's enough force if you fall backwards to strike your head and cause that skull fracture, well, he could have slipped and struck his head. The car could have backed up and not known that he was there and nudged him and caused him to fall. I mean, any event that would cause him to fall backwards obviously would result in him striking his head. So there's numerous, almost infinite possibility of different scenarios that could result in that type of an event.
Okay.
Mr. Jackson?
Nothing further.
Okay.
That's
Dr. Rentschler, you are all set, sir.
Thank you,
We're
Your Honor.
done.
Arizona City Council for the last time at sidebar right now.
For the last time. I don't believe that. All right, are they going to go to lunch? Why? Because I mean, well, wouldn't she dismiss the jury though?
That you will hear in this case. The lawyers and I still have work to do
Oh.
for tomorrow.
Okay, let me back up.
Tomorrow morning, we will have closed.
Scheduling. Oh wait, what? Whoa. Closing. Hold on. Wait, whoa. Closing arguments? Oh my God, really? No. Hold on, guys. Scheduling.
You are unmuted.
Thank you, Your Honor. With that, if rests.
Okay.
They're
Sure. That
resting.
is the evidence
That's
in this case after all these weeks. That's the evidence that you
Holy
will hear
fuck,
in
that's
this
a-
case. The lawyers and I still have work to do for tomorrow.
But tomorrow
God.
morning, we will have closing arguments
Oh my God.
of counsel. They'll get
Oh
an
my God.
hour apiece to be
Oh my
able to
God.
argue this case to you. I'll instruct you in the law, and then 12 of you will
Okay.
begin your deliberations
Okay.
sometime.
So here's what's happening. I can't believe they're resting. That's it. They're done. So when she says they have work to do, we all know it's going to be jury instructions. I wonder if they're going to keep court open, like for us. Wow. Holy shit. Tomorrow's closing arguments. Well, I'm going to be covering it.
Okay, so
And I will start them whenever the court does, because there's not going to be any fucking, well, assuming they get finished with all the jury instructions and then they start closing arguments right when court starts, then I'll do it.
please do not discuss this case with anyone. Don't do any independent research or investigation.
I'm not going to fast forward through, closing arguments. There won't be sidebars and shit, right? Well, hopefully. Anyway,
Into this case,
different
if
pacing.
you happen to see, hear, read anything about this case, please disregard it. Let us know.
Wow.
See you tomorrow.
All rise for the court, please.
Let's see what she says. She might put something else on the record. Wow. Wow. Well, I kind of was predicting it. My prediction was by the end of the day today, but they finished even quicker than I thought. But that's what I was expecting. I was expecting the two AARCA dudes, and then I was thinking there was that one other expert, Brian Van E, because they mentioned him in the motion, but they had the other dude instead. So, but there was 3 witnesses. So my thought was 3 more witnesses, but like they just finished them a lot quicker than I expected. But that's what I was thinking, that they would rest by the end of the day today. And then I think I was saying if they were to call Chief Berkowitz or whatever, or the DA, then I was giving it a day and a half, as in half day tomorrow. But they didn't call him, so.
Jimmy, I'll let you know on that one.
Oh, right. No rebuttals. Right. Of course. There's no rebuttals. Right. There's no rebuttal. That's right. Thank you for reminding me, because my brain is, I'm so shocked that, so there's no rebuttal. Okay. So let's go. So, okay. Here's my thought. They're going to be doing jury instructions. So they'll use, I mean, always in every trial, this trial has a million exceptions. Oh, it ended. Wait, what? That's it? Okay. No rebuttals. Then she said they have work to do. Okay. I'm going to keep an eye on it, and here's why. Oh my God, what is happening? Hold on. Okay. Okay. Here's the thing, guys. This is insane. Let me just do this. Hold on. Where is it? Okay, here it is. So, all right. This has been a whirlwind. So here's the thing. So okay. No rebuttals. So they're going to be working on jury instructions. Now, okay, here's what I will say is that I always use the NBC Boston feed. There's been like 1 or 2 other days where they ended it and they did 2 streams in one day instead of staying on through the lunch. I don't know why. Maybe it's because they wait to see if Bev says for sure if they're coming back or not. So I don't know what the deal is. Like, is it over? Most trials that I've seen, they stream jury instructions. So, but again, this has so many exceptions. So I really don't know what the deal is. But usually we get to watch them do jury instructions. So I really just don't know. Oh, thank you, Fender. Remove myself. Sorry. Hold on. I was going to show the red dress more. So yeah, that was from my senior violin recital for my undergraduate. So yeah, so here's what we'll do though. And then I'm wondering too, if they'll still be working on jury instructions tomorrow. Like, she didn't tell the jury. So we've seen this in other trials where the jury instructions can take a really fucking long time, right? So she doesn't need the jury until they've finished with that. And then they usually will read the jury instructions and then do closing arguments, or the other way around. That varies by the court. They might do closing arguments first, but either way, they have to settle their fighting over the jury instructions, which, I mean, I imagine it's going to be contentious, right? I mean, so what we'll do is I will just keep an eye out for what is going on. And then, I'm talking about arguing over the jury instructions before they've finalized them. Because they always show it when they're giving the instructions. So in other words, that's ostensibly what they should be doing today after lunch, right? That's what I'm saying. It's like, it looks like they cut the court feed, potentially. But like, they always argue over the instructions. That's always on the record, always, every trial. So I'm wondering if they're going to come back. That's what I'm wondering after lunch. And it would probably be pretty soon because they've been taking like 40-minute lunches. So we might know sooner rather than later, like if they come back or not. And I was going to say too, there's been other days where the feed did cut in half. Not very many, but there's been a couple. And I think it's because they were confused over Judge Bev's scheduling because she doesn't put it on the fucking record. So I'm wondering if they're going to come back. I can't imagine they won't put, that's going to be on the record though. Right, that makes sense. She said, the lawyers and I have work to do. That means jury instructions. That's always on the record for us. The jury goes home. We get to hear them argue over the jury instructions and fight over it every trial. And then tomorrow, assuming they finish it, because it can take a long time, right? Assuming they finish the jury instructions today, then the jury will come in tomorrow. They'll either do closing arguments and then be read the jury instructions, or other way around. They'll be read the jury instructions and then have closing arguments. But either way, Judge Bev is anticipating it for them to take at least the rest of the day today to finalize the jury instructions, which makes sense. Like I said, that I wouldn't be surprised if they don't finish it and then they even argue it into the morning. But this is always done on the record. So, right. I wouldn't be surprised if they're still arguing in the morning and then the jury's, told don't come in yet, come at lunch or something. I don't know. So I wonder if there's been, let me see if there's anything in terms of like people that are there in the courtroom that know, local people, if they have an idea, because it sucks. Oh, wait, actually, guys, they're going to come back. I just got a notification. I think they're coming back. I was right, because I was like, this is always done on the fucking record, man. And this to me is one of the most interesting parts of the trial, is when they do the jury instructions and they're arguing over it. Because this is really fucking important. This is maybe one of the most important things that can happen, apart from like motions in limine, in terms of what the jury ends up hearing at trial. That's your motions in limine. And then the jury instructions is how they're going to render a verdict. Okay, so it's bedtime for Fender. I do believe they're going to come back. Let me just see. Okay, here's the place that usually has them. Let me just look. Why is this on day one? Oh my God, never mind. Okay, this is useless. I've been able to find these updates before. Anyway, I think they're coming back, guys. I think they're coming back. Oh, hold on. I think I might have found an update. Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. Sorry, I forgot to undo my screen. Okay, so I think they're coming. I think they're going to come back. I think they just cut the court feed and they're going to come back. So yeah, I'm going to assume so. All right, guys. So what I will do, fuck, I almost feel like it could be any second though. Let me just, okay, hold on. Let me just double check, because I don't want to, if they're going to come back, I don't want to like start a new stream. Let's just see. Let's just see if they're coming back. Let me just see what NBC Boston's doing here before we finalize a decision, because it would be easier not to try to make another stream if they're going to come back in a second. Let's just see. It's not up yet. I would bet money on it that they're going to come back for us to do this, because we know that's what they're working on. And it's always fucking on the record. So yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. So we'll come back. In like, I don't know, I'll just keep an eye on it. 20, 30 minutes. I'll create a new stream for the afternoon for jury instructions. Oh my God, that's so exciting. I freaking love jury instructions. And then tomorrow we'll have closing arguments, assuming they finish. Now, the good news is this, guys, we'll now know by the end of today if they've finished working on jury instructions or not yet, right? Either they'll have finished it or they won't. And then we'll know what the deal will be for tomorrow. So yeah. All right. I'm going to end this stream. and prepare for the next one. I'll see you guys soon. Good night, Fender. See you in the morning/evening for you. Love y'all. I'm not going to roll the intro since it's a 2-parter today, but I'll see you guys soon. Thanks for being here and being a squirrel.